Who do you think you are, thinking you can run an entire department? That sentence still echoes in my mind even now, nearly a year later. I can't forget the look in his eyes. Cold as ice, hard as steel. When he said those words. I used to think I was safe, respected, that I had built something lasting. But it turns out, what I built was just a ladder for someone else to climb, then kick me down without mercy. And worst of all, that person used to be a close friend of mine. I poured my youth into building that company, only to be pushed aside one day like expired merchandise. And I'm Olivia Dawson, 38 years old. I used to be the director of risk management at a financial firm in Austin, Texas, where I devoted nearly 12 years of my life. When I started, the company had about 25 employees. There were no clear departments, no standard processes, and no one really understood the role of risk in the financial system. I volunteered to start from scratch, designing every form, every report, every quarterly risk analysis meeting. I wasn't a genius, but I was hardworking, persistent, and always present when the company was in trouble. When the market was volatile, I was the one staying up all night calculating contingency plans. When the company underwent a surprise audit in 2017, I was the one who saved it from a fine that could have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I never needed applause or praise, I just wanted my work to be recognized, and for a long time, I believed it was. The founder of the company, Monsieur Marais, was an open-minded man who always listened and encouraged me to implement new initiatives. We weren't close, but he always gave me decision-making power and complete trust. I had the freedom to hire people, adjust budgets, and run my department. I used to think, if this company grows, I'll grow with it, as an essential part of its journey. Then Colin Brooks showed up. Colin was once the head of the credit department, a talented man but wildly ambitious. He often came to my office to discuss interdepartmental cooperation, or invited me for coffee when the chance arose. I used to admire Colin for his quick thinking and polished, calm demeanor. But looking back now, it was all part of a carefully crafted performance. Last year the company was acquired by an investment firm from New York for nearly $28 million. Franklin decided to retire early and handed the reins over to Colin, the man he believed had both business acumen and leadership skills. I still remember the night Franklin threw his farewell party. I raised a glass to toast Colin, genuinely wishing him well. I had no idea that would be the beginning of a nightmare. Within just 3 months, everything changed drastically. Colin began replacing the old leadership team, using the excuse of restructuring for operational efficiency. Veteran managers, people who had stood by me since the very beginning, were gradually transferred, demoted, or worse, silently forced out. I was one of the last to remain. One Monday morning I was called into the office. Colin sat behind a brand new desk, sunlight streaming in from the large windows making his face glow. But his words were colder than any air conditioner in the room. "Olivia, we value everything you've done, but the company needs a new direction." I looked him straight in the eye. "What do you mean?" "We're transferring you to the administration department. Your new role will be internal coordinator." I thought I misheard. "You're telling me to leave the department I built from the ground up to do paperwork?" Colin smiled and nodded. "Administration is a critical function. I know you'll do well." I said nothing more. I knew this wasn't a suggestion. It was a demotion sentence sugar-coated in corporate language. I left the office feeling numb. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt something break inside me. As if all those years of effort, all those sleepless nights, every bold decision, had turned to dust. 3 days later I found out who replaced me. Evan James, a 26-year-old kid who had never managed anything and had no experience in financial risk. But he was hired at half my salary, and happened to be the nephew of one of the new board members. I was replaced with a cheap pawn, and the department I had poured my heart into was handed over to a child playing with a shiny new toy. I don't know what Colin thought I would do. Cry and beg? Quietly walk away? Quit out of wounded pride? No, I did none of those things. I smiled, nodded, and began quietly planning my payback, in a way he would never see coming. I used to think Colin was just ambitious. But I underestimated him. He wasn't just ambitious. He was ruthlessly greedy. After kicking me out of risk management, Colin didn't stop. It was like the company was being slowly strangled from within. A flood of internal emails came out from the CEO's office, announcing cost-cutting measures aligned with the new investment strategy. It sounded reasonable, but every line was a calculated slash into employee loyalty. First came the end of flexible work hours. Single moms like Rebecca in HR or Paul in IT, whose wife was ill, were forced into fixed schedules with no say. Longtime employees suddenly had to work overtime without pay. And salaries? Don't even dream of it. Next came the so-called compensation restructuring plan, a fancy way of saying Colin had just slashed base salaries by 15 to 20% for all mid-level employees. Quarterly bonuses, which used to be the main incentive for team leaders to maintain performance, were now turned into a flexible evaluation program, approved solely by Colin. Meaning? If he didn't like you, you wouldn't see a single cent. I remember the first all-hands meeting after the new policy was rolled out. The large conference room, lit by bright white lights, shone down on dull, heavy faces. Colin took the stage like a seasoned politician, white shirt, dark blue tie, deep voice carefully modulated. We are working toward a sustainable future, and to get there, sacrifices are needed from everyone. I sat in the third row, arms crossed, eyes fixed on his mouth. Every word was fake. The sacrifices he talked about weren't his. They weren't from the new board. They came from the hundreds of people who had stuck with this company since it was just a tiny office on the third floor of the Parkfield business complex. I turned and saw Samantha, the lead analyst, someone who had worked beside me for 6 years, pressing her lips tightly. She had just taken out a loan to buy a house, and now she had to think about selling her car to make up for the pay cut. Worse, Colin had laid off the entire internal accounting department, handing everything over to a cheap outsourcing firm in Florida. And amid all the chaos, Evan James, the 26-year-old kid Colin brought in to replace me, was receiving baffling levels of favoritism. Despite having no experience, he was showing up next to the CEO in strategic meetings, got his own private office, and even had a personal assistant. A newcomer, clueless about risk protocols, now steering a department that once handled hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The only reason I could think of? He was obedient, and more importantly, cheap. I once tried speaking with Evan to see if there was any shred of conscience in him. I walked into my old office, now reeking of instant coffee and cluttered with unfiled paperwork. "Evan," I began, "you doing okay? I noticed the reporting system's been delayed for 3 days." He looked up blankly. I'm trying to make sense of these analysis charts. Could you show me?" So I pressed my lips together. "That's your job. Colin said you'd help me if I needed it." I straightened up, locking eyes with him. "Colin said a lot of things, but if you want to keep that seat, you better learn how to stand on your own." I turned and walked out before he could respond. The truth was, I had nothing left to lose. I still worked, still showed up on time, still smiled politely in meetings. But in my mind, a plan was quietly taking shape. A plan that was detailed, calculated, and sharp as a knife honed over years. Colin thought he was the one in control, but he had no idea I had quietly mapped every move this company made for over a decade. Every process, every weak link in the system, every loyal employee he had cast aside. I knew them all. And I had a weapon even more powerful than knowledge: time. While he basked in his power and counted every dollar saved from choking the staff, I had already started my countdown. I knew I couldn't take him down overnight, but I could quietly remove each screw from the chair he sat on, until his own greed brought it crashing down. I didn't need to scream or start a rebellion. I just needed to wait for the right moment. Colin thought I would take it. He thought I would swallow my pride and keep working like an obedient puppet. But he forgot one thing. I'm not the kind to bend. Not when someone attacks the one thing I value most. My dignity. I started planning in the very first week after I was demoted. At first, all I had was anger. But the more I observed, the more I realized Colin wasn't building a solid system, he only knew how to destroy and claim. The structure I once helped build was crumbling by the day. He placed unqualified people in key roles just because they were agreeable and well-connected. A ship with no true captain. I quietly began by updating my resume and achievements, then expanded my network on LinkedIn. Every lunch break, I left the building for an hour, pretending to eat out. But really, I was at a small cafe on South Congress Street, doing online interviews. I made sure to leave no trace on the company computer, never used personal email during work hours. Every move was calculated. After 2 weeks, I received interview invitations from 3 major companies, 2 based in Seattle and 1 in Denver. All 3 were interested in my background, and just 1 week later, Crestfall Capital, an independent investment firm in Colorado, sent me an offer to become Director of Risk Strategy, with a salary twice my current one, plus unlimited year-end bonuses. I printed the email, locked it in my home safe, and began step 2 of my plan. That's when I thought of paid vacation. I still had nearly 90 days of accumulated leave after more than a decade of work. Every time I planned to take a break, some company crisis would come up, and I'd postpone. Colin didn't know, or didn't care, about that. And now, I would turn that debt into leverage. I submitted a request for 3 months off, clearly stating it was to travel across Europe to restore health and mental wellness after a prolonged period of work stress. I submitted it to the HR department, now run by a new woman named Janelle, recently hired by Colin from a failed startup. Janelle skimmed through the leave request, then gave a dry smile. 3 months? That seems a bit long, Miss Olivia. I smiled, my voice velvet soft but sharper than a blade. That's a legitimate entitlement under my employment contract. I've never taken extended leave, and currently I have no specific assignments since I was transferred to an internal support role. If needed, I can provide a breakdown of my remaining vacation days. She had no choice but to sign off. Exactly 3 weeks later, I received an email confirming the leave had been approved. I didn't celebrate. I wasn't in a hurry. I still showed up to the office every day, still smiled and chatted with coworkers, still played the role of harmless Olivia as if I had accepted everything. At the same time, I had one more task: train Evan, the boy Colin handpicked to replace me. I knew full well that Evan wasn't capable of handling the risk department, but I said nothing. I helped him get familiar with the system, just at a basic level. When he asked deeper questions, I smiled and said, "That part I used to handle manually, it's not documented, just observe for now, you'll get used to it." I let Evan fend for himself, let him struggle with complex reports and quantitative analyses he couldn't fully grasp. Day by day, the backlog grew larger. I still supported him, but only just enough to maintain the illusion that I was cooperating. I didn't destroy anything, I simply stood still and let the system collapse under someone unqualified. 1 month before my leave, Colin held an emergency meeting with me and Evan. He frowned when he saw the department performance charts nosedive. He asked me for the reason. I shrugged. "I'm just supporting as assigned. Evan is the one currently in charge." Colin turned to Evan, his tone cold. "We can't let this department spiral like this. You need to pick up the pace." Evan swallowed hard, nodding repeatedly. I sat there, calm as someone watching a play unfold. 2 weeks later, I sent an email reminding them of my approved leave, along with a plane ticket to Lisbon, Portugal, as an undeniable confirmation. Colin replied curtly, "Enjoy your vacation." And then the day came. I picked up my suitcase and walked out of the office with a light step. I didn't look back. I knew that in just a few weeks, everything I left behind would become a nightmare for those who thought they could easily replace me. For 3 months in Europe, I didn't answer a single call from the company. I turned off email notifications, I disappeared from the radar as if I had never existed. But I knew exactly what was happening, because a few old friends still whispered to me about what was going on behind those doors. The risk department. In shambles. Evan, so overwhelmed he had to be hospitalized for stress. Colin, desperately trying to get me back. But what happens when someone who was underestimated gains full control of their fate? They don't come back. They strike back. I used to think nothing was worse than having a decade of hard work stripped away in a single morning. But watching the department I built from ashes begin to crack layer by layer under someone who had no idea what he was doing, I realized there's a pain sharper than heartbreak. It's cold-blooded contempt. Evan James, the successor Colin installed, had once been an intern at a small health insurance company. His only notable achievement? Being the nephew of a woman who happened to be the mother of one of the new board members. With an empty resume, naive eyes, and a foolish belief that trying hard is enough, Evan stepped into a leadership role as if it were some kind of simulation game. And I, the one replaced, was assigned to train him for the final 2 weeks before my extended leave. I agreed, but only on the surface. Evan walked into my office, or rather my former office, the place where I once crafted strategy reports that reshaped the company's entire financial direction, with a face full of confident cluelessness. "Miss Olivia, I'm really grateful you're still here to support me. Colin said you'd be a great mentor." I nodded, a slow smile forming on my lips. "That's right. I'll show you everything you need to stay in that seat as long as possible." Evan didn't catch the subtext. He scribbled down every word I said, eyes glued to his laptop like a diligent student. But what I taught were the most complex analyses, multi-layered Excel formula systems, and risk assessment reports, packed with technical jargon I knew for sure he wouldn't understand. Every time Evan asked, "Could you explain this part a bit more?" I tilted my head. "Oh, that part? Just check the documents I left on Google Drive, but remember to request access from IT. I no longer have permission since..." I was reassigned. I let him get lost in a maze of processes, algorithms, and responsibilities that had never been simplified. The more he tried, the deeper he sank. I didn't lie, but I didn't tell the whole truth either. And I didn't stop him when he submitted reports late, attached the wrong charts, or sent incorrect data to high-profile clients. Each mistake was a ticking time bomb. And me, I was just the bystander, watching the clock. 2 weeks passed in chaos. Every day brought at least one frantic internal call from other departments. "Where's the analysis data? Evan sent the wrong version again. Why is the risk ratio over the threshold this quarter, with no alert?" I sat nearby, typing a few polite emails, then quietly stepping back, like a by-the-book advisor. Evan started panicking after the first week. He began arriving earlier, staying later, looking exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. But instead of asking for my advice, he kept scrambling to prove himself, just as Colin had encouraged. One Friday afternoon, I was making coffee when I saw him slam a stack of papers on the table. "Damn it, this report doesn't match. Olivia, I used the exact data you mentioned, and it's still wrong." I sipped my coffee, calm as ever. "Oh, maybe you forgot to apply the unofficial asset variable. That data's in the temporarily unused folder. But it's actually still needed. You never said it was required. I thought you'd double-check the logic before submitting. After all, you're the one in charge of the department." I didn't need to scream or launch a public revenge. I just needed to make him carry the weight of the chair Colin had rushed to give him. 2 days before my leave, I happened to overhear a conversation in the conference room between Colin and Janelle, the head of HR. "Should we really let Evan continue?" Janelle's voice was clearly tense. Colin responded slowly. "He needs more time. And I don't want to make another change right now. It'll make the board think I hired the wrong guy. But Olivia isn't helping much anymore. She'll be gone soon, he'll figure it out." I pressed my lips together, turning away, trying not to laugh, until my stomach hurt. They didn't understand. The problem wasn't that Evan didn't have enough time. It was that he didn't have the foundation. And more importantly, he lacked the judgment to run a complex machine like the risk department. On my last day before the leave, I walked over to Evan and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Good luck, Evan. The next 3 months will be a real test. Hope you can manage. He looked up at me, tired and grateful. I'll do my best. Thanks for guiding me. I simply smiled and walked away, saying nothing more. Over the next 3 months, I knew exactly what awaited Evan: a brutal storm with no life raft. And me? I'd be sitting at a riverside cafe in Florence, sipping hot espresso, reading status updates. If I even felt like it. Because when a broken department is handed to someone unqualified, and the only person who truly understands how it runs steps away, collapse is inevitable. I had just returned from my 3-month leave when I received an email from Janelle. Olivia, please come meet with Colin at 10 o'clock this morning. There are a few things to discuss. I read the line and smirked. A few things? I knew exactly what was coming. When I walked into the 5th floor conference room, Colin was sitting cross-legged, flipping quickly through notes in a black leather notebook. He looked up with that familiar forced smile. The kind people use when they're about to lie but still want to seem polite. Olivia, welcome back. We've decided to transfer you to the External Relations Department to assist with shareholder reporting. I sat down, tilting my head. External relations? But I have no experience in that area. Colin waved it off, like it was nothing. That's all right. You're adaptable. We believe you'll adjust quickly. I smiled. In my head, only one sentence echoed. Perfect. That's exactly what I was waiting for. External relations was on the floor below. A gloomy, outdated, forgotten space. I was assigned to sit next to Tom, a man around 40, with a belly and few words. He was tasked with training me, and on the very first day, I switched on my performance mode. Olivia, have you ever worked with dividend summary sheets before? I blinked, playing innocent. Dividends? Could you explain that a bit more? I've never dealt with those. Tom looked at me like I had just landed from another planet. Oh, no problem. I'll walk you through it from the beginning. And so began a stretch of days where I sat quietly at my desk, opened documents to read, but never touched a task beyond nodding, asking vague questions, and always needing a bit more time to catch up. Evan sent the wrong budget file to the Japanese partner, exposing all the errors. They were furious and pulled the contract. I pressed my lips together, smiling faintly. True fear doesn't come from formidable enemies, but from the incompetence of your own teammates. I had written that line in a risk report 2 years ago. Now, it returned like a prophecy. In the 3rd week, I was in Venice. I sat on a gondola, watching the fiery sunset reflect on the Grand Canal, while across the ocean, Evan was likely drowning in dancing numbers and shouting emails from the executive board. Colin was probably slamming his hand on the desk, yelling into the phone as the financial report was rejected for failing to meet independent audit standards. I imagined him desperately trying to call me, but all he heard was the automated voicemail. Am currently on personal leave and unable to respond. Please contact the designated personnel during this time. Designated personnel? Evan. In the 2nd month, I went to France. Paris was always crowded and noisy, but I chose a slower pace, renting a small studio near Montmartre, where I could sit for hours on the balcony, reading books, sipping espresso, and watching people pass by. This time, it was Tom from External Relations who sent an email. Colin's furious because the entire shareholder presentation plan has been delayed due to missing data. Evan says it's because he wasn't trained properly. He might ask you to return early. I marked the email as read and closed it. In the final month, I arrived in Florence. In the early winter chill, I sat at a small eatery by the Arno River, sipping Italian noodle soup while a soft piano concerto played from the next room. A new message popped up on my phone, this time from an unfamiliar address. Colin Brooks, at rightfinancialgroup.com. Olivia, we truly need your support. Would you be willing to return early? We are open to discussing suitable terms. Looking forward to your response. I leaned back and read the line twice. He, Colin, was finally bowing his head. I clicked reply and typed, word by word. Sorry, as clearly stated in my automatic response, I am not working during my leave. For any related issues, please contact the current assigned personnel. I hit send. Slowly. Deliberately. Then turned off my phone. I wanted him to know I had seen it. And chose to ignore it. The day I returned to Austin, a light rain was falling. I rolled my suitcase into the apartment, hung up my coat, poured a glass of water, and opened my laptop. My inbox had 47 unread messages from internal contacts. Mostly responses to the chaos that had unfolded while I was gone. The name Olivia Dawson appeared, repeatedly. Pulled into complaints, blame, panic. But I knew I didn't need to respond to anything. Because everything that happened was the inevitable consequence of a system lacking someone who understood it. I had left. I had cut contact. And I had let them slowly sink in, something they once believed could run without me. I walked into the office on Monday morning, the first day back after my 3-month leave, carrying a soft smile and calm eyes. No one greeted me. No one dared make eye contact. The third floor, the former heart of the risk department, now looked like a war zone after a storm. No need to ask. I could see everything had fallen apart. The smell of burnt coffee from the automatic machine, the frantic typing from confused interns, and a mountain of documents nearly toppling over on Evan's desk. He didn't even look up when I walked by. I didn't blame him. He was probably praying I'd vanish again. I headed straight to Colin's office. He stood there, no longer the arrogant executive from before. His shirt was wrinkled, tie loosened, and forehead soaked in sweat. Olivia, he rushed toward me as if I were the only lifeline left in a sinking ship. Thank you for coming back on schedule. I'd like to urgently discuss something with you. I sat down on the leather sofa, set my bag beside me and crossed my legs. About what? Colin swallowed, trying to recover his fake composure. The risk department is in trouble. We need your help during this restructuring phase. I know you handled things well before, and I'm proposing a temporary support rate of triple your current salary. Of course. Only for a few weeks. I gave a slight, cold smile. Triple? That does sound tempting. Colin nodded quickly, as if afraid I'd change my mind. Great. Can you start today? I smiled. I'll consider it, but first. Here is my resignation letter. I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on the table. He froze. I'll follow proper procedure. Give the full 2-week notice, but after that I'm leaving. For good. He was silent, then nodded, eyes lowered to the floor. Understood. But during those 2 weeks, I truly hope you'll support us as much as possible. That answer just gave a slight nod and left the room. During my final 2 weeks at the company, I became a silent ghost, with the label savior. I showed up on time every morning, sitting in the corner of the office, where I had the best view but was the least likely to be disturbed. My computer stayed on, an Excel file always open, but no formulas ever ran. Evan, now like a walking corpse, would occasionally wander over to ask, Miss Olivia, can I ask you about the market risk analysis? I turned to him, my voice flat. I'm restructuring the old analysis template. Please send your question by email. He nodded, then disappeared. I never replied to any messages. Other employees, even the new manager from finance, tried to approach me. But each time, I tactfully stepped back, leading them into a maze of procedures and vague references like, I'm not sure which version of the document was officially released. You should get Colin to approve. I haven't been updated on the new process. Maybe check with legal? I only provide support upon request. Without a written directive, I can't intervene further. I wasn't lying, but I certainly wasn't helping. And then, the strangest part, they still paid me triple my old salary, just to have me sit there. By the end of the first week, Colin called me into the meeting room. I'm not seeing clear progress from you. I looked straight at him. Maybe I need additional access to the old systems. I no longer have admin rights. So, how long will that take? Depends on IT's response time. Probably sometime next week. Colin nodded, not daring to push further. I spent the second week packing and finalizing paperwork with my new company in Denver. Crestfall Capital had waited for me for 3 months. Now, they were ready to bring me in as Director of Risk Strategy, with my own office, my own assistant, and a team that was actually prepared to absorb real knowledge. Unlike this place, where I'd been treated like an outdated tool. On my last day, I printed 2 emails. One was the confirmation from accounting, showing the sky-high salary I had received over 2 weeks of doing virtually nothing. The other was my official offer letter from Crestfall Capital. I placed both sheets on Colin's desk. Thank you for the interesting time. I'll remember this company, but more importantly, I'll never forget how I was treated. Colin could only stare at me, his face pale, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe I had not only survived him, but was walking away with my head held high. I walked out of the office one last time. No one said goodbye. None was needed. I knew many eyes were watching from behind. Some filled with regret. Some with admiration. Some with envy. But I didn't care. What I knew was this. The man who once thought himself clever, Colin Brooks, paid triple the salary to keep an empty shell with my name on it. And I took every advantage. From the chaos he created. A perfect ending to a game I never officially declared. On my first morning in Denver, I woke up earlier than usual. Not out of stress or pressure, but because I genuinely looked forward to starting a new chapter. The apartment I had temporarily rented overlooked the Rockies. Sunlight poured through the large windows, shining across the desk where a brand new laptop, HR files, and a Q1 strategy draft awaited. At Crestfall Capital, the fastest-growing investment firm in Colorado. New title, Director of Risk Strategy. Starting salary more than double what I earned at Wright Financial, not to mention stock options and quarterly bonuses. I stood in front of the mirror, tightened my silk tie, adjusted my blazer, and smiled at myself. In the reflection there was no trace of the woman who had once been demoted without remorse, replaced by someone incompetent. Now there was Olivia Dawson, the woman who returned from the ashes with a plan no one had seen coming. Crestfall wasn't like Wright Financial. No compromises. No hollow leadership or blatant favoritism. On my first day, the CEO personally introduced me during the strategy meeting. No empty slogans. No one asked, "Are you settling in okay?" Because they already knew I was hired for my actual capabilities. I had a dedicated team of 6, each experienced and ready to implement the risk assessment tools I had once proposed but never saw come to life at my old company. During our first meeting, I stood before the digital board and presented the plan to integrate a real-time market volatility tracking system. The room was dead silent. When I finished, a director at the end of the table was the first to applaud. Then everyone joined in. "We've been waiting for someone like you for a long time," the CEO said, walking up to me. "You're not just the right fit, you're exactly what we need." While I was busy rebuilding a department to actual professional standards, back in Austin, Wright Financial was crumbling by the day. Samantha, still in touch, couldn't hide her exasperation during our short calls. "Colin hasn't released the final quarterly audit report. The shareholders are pressuring for mass layoffs. Evan has resigned, completely collapsed. They hired an external audit firm, but it flagged major errors from last quarter onward. I heard the parent company is considering selling the entire southern branch for less than half of what they originally paid." I listened to every word. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because that downfall wasn't caused by me. It was the inevitable result of arrogance, greed, and the failure to judge people correctly. One Thursday afternoon, while on a business trip to San Francisco with the strategy team, I happened to see Colin walking out of an office building. he didn't see me. He wore a plain white shirt, worn and tired. Nothing like the powerful figure he once was. He looked like a man desperately clinging to the last remnants of a faded reputation. I stood from a distance, never approaching. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need any explanations. I had won, and my victory didn't need to be shouted. 8 months after leaving the old company, I was invited to speak at the statewide financial conference, a major event for leaders in the investment industry. On stage, under the bright lights, I spoke about rebuilding an effective risk department, about detecting discrepancies in systems and addressing them before they became crises. I never mentioned Right Financial. There was no need. But those who knew, understood. When I stepped off the stage, someone rushed up to shake my hand. "You're Olivia Dawson? I've heard your story. You're a legend." I simply smiled. I didn't need to be a legend. I just needed to do the right thing. And let the rest speak for itself. Now, I still wake up early every morning, but no longer to face a draining day or brace myself against disrespect. I wake up to lead, to build. To prove a simple, bitter truth. Never underestimate a woman who knows her worth. Right Financial didn't collapse because I left. It collapsed because they thought I wasn't worth keeping. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder of a harsh but necessary truth. When people underestimate your value, don't prove them wrong with words, let your actions speak louder. Betrayed, demoted, and replaced by someone unqualified, Olivia didn't react with anger but with strategy and quiet resolve. She left at the right moment, secured a better job, and while those who underestimated her struggled with the wreckage, she rose. In real life, sometimes the greatest victory is walking away, without looking back. What do you think about how Olivia handled the situation? Would you have done the same in her place? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful real-life stories about family, career, and resilience. I never forgot the smell of that sweet vanilla cake, a scent like a lie baked to cover up an approaching nightmare. My mom never cooked, not even on Thanksgiving when she'd just ordered delivery pizza. Yet on the morning of my 18th birthday, there she was in an apron, fussing over the oven like a model mother. In that moment, I felt something off. Like the whole house was holding its breath, about to explode. They didn't sing happy birthday. No candles. Just a long silence like the crack on the wall I had never noticed before. And then, my dad called me into the living room with a voice as cold as steel. I was still in my gray pajamas, my hair a mess, but my heart was already pounding like war drums. He sat on the couch, arms crossed, not even looking at me. My mom sat beside him, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow her. I didn't get the chance to ask before he spoke. "Sit down, Amelia." I sat down carefully, like stepping into a minefield. His voice wasn't loud, but there was something in his tone that reminded me of getting scolded as a kid for spilling milk on the carpet. Something old, something repeating, like I'd lived through this moment in a terrible dream. My mom didn't lift her head. Her lips were pressed into a stiff line, her hands twisting the edge of her dress. Then she said it, flat, emotionless, no warning. "You were adopted." I went numb. "We took you in when you were 2, my dad continued, still not looking at me. "Your birth mother couldn't raise you, so we did what was best." That word, best, felt like a blade to the chest. I sat there, unblinking, my head buzzing like sirens were going off inside it. Instead of hugging me, or offering comfort, my mom just said again, "You're grown now, it's time you went your own way." I didn't ask anything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream why, like in the movies. I just stared at them. The 2 people who had raised me, cared for me, but never truly loved me. Then my dad bent down, pulled out a small, worn blue duffel bag from under the couch, and slid it toward me across the carpet. "There's some money in there, and a few changes of clothes. We arranged for you to stay temporarily at a motel near 8th Street. From now on, you're on your own. They had planned this. Like it had been scheduled long ago, just waiting for me to turn 18, so it'd be legal. A package, returned right on time. I bent down, picked up the bag. It was light as air, like my place in that house. But I still smiled. Soft, thin, like I was saying thank you for a kindness I never received. Thank you, I said, my voice eerily calm. They didn't notice how my hand gripped the strap so tight it turned white. They didn't see my gaze, sharp, metallic, silent. Because they didn't know. They had no idea that 3 weeks earlier I had found what they had hidden for 16 years. It was in the bottom drawer of the hallway filing cabinet. I had been cleaning while looking for an old box of Christmas lights. Behind a mess of crumpled tax returns and utility bills, I found a faded yellow envelope with no return address. It read, Elena Hartwell, Confidential. I had never heard that name before. My hands trembling, I opened it. Inside was an old birth certificate, faded with time. My name, Amelia Hartwell, was printed in the center. But the most shocking part was the line that listed my birth mother's name. Elena Hartwell, same last name, same first name, and no father's name listed. I could barely breathe when I saw the stamp from the King County Medical Office, dated April 2004. Why had they never shown me this? Why was my mother's name Elena, not Claire, the woman I had always called Mom? Even stranger, inside the envelope was an old, folded newspaper. It contained an article from over 17 years ago, headline in bold. Psychologist, blows whistle on medical scandal, institutionalized. And beneath the headline was a photo of a woman whose eyes looked just like mine, eyes that were both fierce and full of pain. Her name, Elena Hartwell. I hadn't told anyone, not a soul. I had tucked everything into a new envelope and hidden it under my mattress, along with a notebook and a few unfinished notes. And now, as I walked out of that house with the old bag in hand, I didn't feel discarded. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with the truth, and a name, Elena Hartwell. The woman who might be my real mother. The woman buried by someone powerful's secrets. And I will uncover it all. I left the old house with frozen feet and a heart on fire. Each step on the sidewalk toward the bus stop sounded like the beat of a new heart. The heart of someone who had lost everything, yet found something more precious than family. A reason to fight. That night, I rented a bunk in a rundown workers' motel near 8th Street, the place my adoptive parents had arranged for me. The room reeked of bleach and mold, and the flickering fluorescent light buzzed so loudly near my ear, I couldn't sleep. I curled up in the blanket, clutching the fabric bag to my chest like my life was inside it, but in truth, the only thing of value was the yellow envelope I had hidden between 2 jackets. The next morning, with the sky still a dull ash gray, I left the motel without speaking to anyone and took a bus to the public library in downtown Tacoma. The only place I knew still kept archives of newspapers and public records. I tucked myself into a corner behind some old bookshelves and sat down at the microfilm station, my hands trembling. In them was the folded newspaper from the envelope, the one that had sparked the fire of suspicion in my mind. Psychologist blows whistle on medical scandal, institutionalized. The article was written by a freelance journalist. Below the headline was a grainy black and white photo capturing the moment a young woman was led away by police. It was clear she was Elena Hartwell, the woman whose eyes looked just like mine. But what chilled me was the name in the article. Dr. Marcus Halbrook, executive director of a private medical facility once operating in Seattle, where Elena had worked. The article said Elena had filed a complaint accusing him of illegal research on female patients, including unlawful confinement, injecting unknown substances, and using extreme psychological manipulation techniques. It also noted that she was declared mentally unstable just weeks after submitting her report to the Washington State Medical Board. She was later taken to Silver Birch, a psychiatric treatment facility in the suburbs of Olympia, a name I had never heard before. There was no trial, no hearing. Everything closed up like Elena had never existed in the system. and nowhere did it mention she had a child. I printed the article, folded it, and slipped it back into the envelope. A tight feeling started to grip my chest. I couldn't deny the truth becoming clearer. My birth mother had been silenced by people in power, and my adoptive parents might be involved. I remembered the strange letters labeled Hellbrook Medical Foundation that my dad used to receive, always hurriedly tucked away behind his back or into a locked drawer. When I was little, he said they were charity mail, but now, I questioned everything I'd been told for 16 years. I returned to the desk, opened the library's laptop, and began searching for information on Silver Birch. But almost nothing came up. No website, no public medical records. As if the place had never existed. I tried another approach, calling the Washington State Medical Records Archive office. The first 3 times no one answered. On the 4th, a tired-sounding middle-aged woman picked up. "I'm looking for information about a facility called Silver Birch. Patient name Alina Hartwell. Admitted around 2006 or 2007? There was silence, then she sighed. "Where are you calling from?" "I am a family member." The silence dragged again. Just as I was about to hang up, she whispered. "Silver Birch shut down in 2010. Some patients were transferred to private centers. But there's no public list." "I'll check and call back, if there's anything left to check." I thanked her, then sat in anxious silence for the rest of the afternoon, scribbling the name, Elena, repeatedly in the corner of my notebook. 2 hours later she called back. Some patients from Silver Birch were transferred to Ridgeview Center for Behavioral Health, in a small town called Hearthlake, about a 3-hour drive east. "Are you sure?" I held my breath. "Nothing's certain in these records. But, if you want to look, that's the only place I've found any match for a Hartwell." I sat frozen for nearly a minute after the call ended. Ridgeview Center. It sounded like a wellness retreat, but for me now, it was the only lead I had left. I checked my balance. Only $23. Just enough for a one-way bus ticket to Hearthlake, no return. That night, I slept in the hallway of the library, using my backpack as a pillow and my thick coat as a blanket. My head spun with questions. Is Elena still alive? If she is, does she remember me? Does she know I'm looking for her? Or had she been completely erased from the world like an unwanted stain? The next morning I boarded the first bus to Hearthlake. No one saw me off. No one knew. I was a girl abandoned. But I wasn't the good daughter anymore. I was Amelia Hartwell, and I was about to dig up a past that powerful people had tried their best to bury. I arrived in Hearthlake on a foggy afternoon, with the sun hiding behind distant blurry mountains. The town felt forgotten by time. Old wooden shops, an empty gas station. Ridgeview Center stood on a low hill, hidden behind thick pine trees like shadows standing guard. I looked at the sign at the gate. The words, "Ridgeview Center for Behavioral Health," were peeling, the faded white paint like rotting teeth. This place didn't look like a health facility. It looked like a building where people stored memories they wanted to forget. I stepped through the gate, my heart pounding so hard it nearly took my breath away. The reception hall was cold and lifeless. A woman stood behind the counter, hair neatly tied back, glasses slipping down her nose. She didn't look up as I approached. "I'm here to visit a patient," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Her name is Elena Hartwell." She glanced at me, eyes narrowing. "Really?" I hesitated for a second, then said firmly, "I'm her daughter." A pause, then she picked up the phone and made an internal call. Her voice was too quiet for me to hear. After hanging up, she pointed down the hallway. "Winga, room 12, keep quiet, she hasn't had visitors in a long time." I walked forward, barely feeling the floor beneath my feet. My hand clutched the strap of my bag, inside it the photo of the newspaper article, the copy of the birth certificate, and the note I wrote a few nights ago with the scribbled words, "Mom, it's me." The door to room 12 creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, a woman sat by a small window. Her gray hair was unkempt, her body so thin she looked almost transparent under a faded gray sweater. She was staring outside, as if the world beyond the glass was the only thing left that mattered. I stood there for a few seconds, unable to speak. "Elena?" I called, my voice trembling like a tight string. She turned her head, slowly, her eyes, so uncannily like mine, landed on my face. For a fleeting moment a spark lit up in them, then as if someone had whispered an old secret to her, she murmured, "Emilia." I collapsed into the wooden chair across from her, tears streaming, before I could stop them. "It's me, I found you, Mom." Elena said nothing. She just looked at me, as if trying to confirm I was real. Then her dry, fragile hand reached up and gently touched my cheek. "They said I wasn't fit to raise you, they said I was crazy, but I never stopped remembering you." I held her hand, feeling the bones beneath skin thin as paper. "I know the truth, I read the article, I saw what they did to you." She shivered slightly, her body tensed for a moment, then slumped, like she was fighting off an invisible pain. "They didn't just want to silence me. They wanted to erase everything I knew." Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with a long-buried fury. "When I worked at the Halbrick Wellness Institute, I handled patient records. I noticed women disappearing from the system. No one knew where they went, no one asked. They were addicts, mentally ill, unwanted women. That's why they were chosen." I held my breath. Words like disappearing, no one asked, cut through my thoughts like knives. "What did they do to them, Mom?" "Experiments. They called it memory reconstruction therapy. But it was really injections, isolation, disorientation, breaking identities. They wanted to control behavior by manipulating memory." She panted, hands clenched tightly together. "I found internal recordings, videos of patients being treated. They called it trauma release technique, but it was psychological torture." Goosebumps ran down my arms. "And you tried to expose them?" "I sent a report to the state medical board. A week later I was suspended. 2 days after that the police came. They didn't read me my rights. Didn't arrest me. They just said I was unstable. And then I was taken to Silver Birch." Elena looked up, eyes glistening. "I begged to see you, but they said I had no rights. They took you away. I didn't know who adopted you. They wouldn't tell me anything. Just said you'd be in a better place." I gripped her hand tighter, my voice firm. "They had no right." Elena gave a faint, bitter smile. One that had long lost its sweetness. "They had everything, money, power, and the system in their hands." I pulled out the birth certificate from my bag, handed it to her. "I found this. Along with the article. Same name as yours, same eyes." Elena held the paper in her trembling hands. Then she pressed it to her chest, like it was the only relic left from a life that had been stolen. After a moment, she whispered, barely audible, "Don't trust anyone in a white coat. Don't trust people with name tags either. They can smile and still inject something into your veins before you even have time to scream." Right then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Elena's expression changed instantly. She sat upright, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes fixed on the window. A nurse walked in, her smile paper thin. "Visiting hours are over." I stood up, looking at Elena one last time. "I'll come back, I promise." The nurse opened the door, eyes flicking over me as if scanning. But just before I stepped out, Elena whispered, "Someone else came once. A young woman. But she never came back." I froze. "Oh. Why?" A chill ran down my spine as the door closed behind me, separating me from my real mother, a woman who'd been buried alive in a rotten system, and whom I now had to free before it was too late. I left Ridgeview with my mind spinning. My mother's words, Elena Hartwell's, clung to my skin like a cold burn. Don't trust people in white coats. Don't trust people with name tags. And then, her final words before I left. "There was a girl who came, but she never returned." Fear followed me the whole bus ride back to Tacoma. I sat by the window, the envelope with my mother's documents tucked close to my side like a precious artifact. But inside me, something else had started to burn. A low, simmering rage. Every word, every broken memory in my mind began fitting together. And every road led to one name. Robert Callahan. The name tied to me for the past 16 years. The man I once called father. The man who drove me to school, taught me how to tie my shoes, and then kicked me out of the house with a bag of old clothes and a few bucks on my 18th birthday. I began going through every letter, every old document I remembered seeing him stash in the oak cabinet drawer, the same drawer where I'd found my birth certificate. Most were boring admin papers, donation receipts. But one name kept repeating. Halbrook Foundation for Mental Health. I searched my memory. It was the name I'd seen in the article about my mother, and the same name that had appeared on the envelopes my father had hidden for years. Right then, I knew something horrific had been hiding behind that noble, charity mask. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I spent the night in a 24/7 cafe, using free Wi-Fi to dig. I dove into nonprofit databases, public tax records, and archived donation files. After more than 3 hours buried in old directories and Reddit threads, I found what I needed. His real name wasn't Robert Callahan. His real name was Robert T. Calloway. And in a 2011 financial report from the Halbrook Foundation, he was listed as one of the signatories approving investments in advanced behavioral therapy programs. I nearly threw up right there. My adoptive father wasn't just a donor to the foundation. He was part of the executive board. One of the people who had signed off on funding the experiments that destroyed my mother's life. And what was even more horrifying, in that same document, a side note read, Case Eva 17, subject transferred to long-term facility, infant relocated successfully. Closed file authorized by RTC, Robert T. Calloway. He signed the order to relocate my mother. And then he adopted me? As a way to cover it up. I was never a child he loved. I was living proof that their program had worked. A child taken from a silenced woman's womb, raised to show that their psychological restructuring methods had stabilized the next generation. I wanted to scream into the silent night. But I didn't cry. He didn't deserve my tears. I screenshotted every document, printed copies and sealed them in a new envelope. I knew it wasn't enough for prosecution yet. But it was enough to destroy the moral image Robert had spent years building. I returned to the old house, the place I once lived, the following afternoon. The house was as quiet as a tomb. I knocked. He opened the door, surprise flashing across his face for a moment. Then came the familiar smile. The smile of a man who always believed he was in control. Amelia, I didn't think you'd come back. I didn't shake his hand. Didn't greet him. I walked straight in and placed the stack of papers on the dining table. Foster dad? Or should I say, Robert T. Calloway? His face went pale. What did you find? Everything. The documents, your real name, your role in the foundation. And I know I wasn't some rescued child. I was your victory badge in a disgusting experiment. He stared at me, his eyes shifting like a trapped animal, then, coldly, you don't understand the bigger picture. It was research, for science. What we did was meant to heal. I let out a bitter laugh. Healing? By destroying vulnerable women? By ruining my mother, then erasing her from every record? Robert didn't answer, he just sat down in a chair and sighed. It's all been buried, no one's going to believe a kid who lived off my money. I stared straight into his eyes. You're wrong. The world isn't what it used to be, and I have something that this truth-hungry world has been waiting for. I walked out the door, leaving him sitting there with a stack of papers drenched in truth. But I knew. The truth is the one thing that can't be silenced forever. I returned to Ridgeview at exactly midnight, just like I promised. The wind was sharp enough to numb my fingertips, but what made me shiver wasn't the weather. It was the thought of what I was about to learn. As I quietly made my way along the back path behind the center, avoiding the front cameras, the small door by the storage room creaked open like someone had been waiting. A warm yellow light spilled out, revealing a familiar face. Nurse Janet. The one who had secretly helped me see my mother. Tonight she was in regular clothes, hair messy, eyes deeply shadowed. She no longer looked like a professional at a psychiatric facility. She looked like someone who hadn't slept for nights, wrestling with her conscience. "You made it," Janet whispered, her voice raspy. "Follow me, quickly." We hurried down a narrow hallway, the flickering lights above warping everything around us. The smell of mold and bleach clung to the air like a ghost. Janet led me into a small room deep in the basement. The concrete walls were cracked, paint peeling, and old file cabinets lined both sides, stacked taller than my head. She locked the door behind us with a worn brass key. "This is where they keep the old internal records. I'm not supposed to bring anyone in here, but after what you said, I can't keep pretending anymore." She opened one drawer and pulled out a thin folder bound with a rubber band. The cover read, "E. Hartwell, Case, EV17. This is all that's left of your mother in the official system." I took it with trembling hands. Inside were psychological evaluations, treatment records, diagnoses stamped paranoid, delusional, special monitoring. "All lies," Janet said, staring into the distance. "I've worked here long enough to know who's truly unstable and who's just a threat to powerful people." I flipped to the last page, a faded photocopy, a handwritten note by Elena. The handwriting was firm, decisive. It was an internal report that had never been sent, detailing forced therapy sessions, behavioral restructuring protocols, and emotion-suppressing drug trials on female patients. I felt my throat tighten. "Is there more?" I asked, my voice dry and hoarse. Janet stared at me for a few seconds, then pulled a small black USB drive from her coat pocket. "This has the copies I've been saving for years, surveillance videos, audio recordings, patient lists. I never dared to go public. But if you have the courage..." I took it. "I don't just have the courage. I have to do this." Janet turned away as if trying not to cry. "There was another girl who came here, about 2 years ago. Her name was Claire Rothman. Journalism student. She was looking for Elena too." I froze. "And where is she now?" "Gone." Janet pulled out another old file from the drawer and shoved it into my hands. Inside were some faded photocopies, a student photo library sheet, Claire's student records, and a rough sketch of several lawsuits that had been blocked, all connected to the Halbrick Foundation. She uncovered a system protected by people above the law. She had proof. But 2 days after leaving Ridgeview, her apartment was broken into. Her laptop wiped clean. She called me in the middle of the night, said someone was watching her. And then? No one ever heard from her again. Police called it missing. I don't believe that. Claire wasn't the type to walk away. I gripped the file and the USB tightly. Cold sweat began to form at the back of my neck. I hadn't just stumbled into a scandal. I was now up against a force willing to do anything to silence those who knew too much. Janet placed a hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Amelia. These people don't stop at destruction. They erase anyone who tries to expose them." I nodded. "But I'm not alone. My mother fought once and was silenced. Claire dared to speak up. I owe them a truth that needs to come to light." Before I left, Janet slipped a small piece of paper into my hand. An encrypted email address. "Send everything you find to this. I have a few friends, they used to work inside the system, they've left it now. They'll help." I walked out of Ridgeview like someone carrying explosives in their pocket. I was no longer the nameless child in an adoption file. I was Amelia Hartwell. Living proof, a witness to a crime that had been buried too long. I stepped into the night, knowing that from this moment forward, my life would never be safe again. But I wasn't afraid. Because I had the truth. and this time, it would be heard. I couldn't sleep after leaving Ridgeview. I sat alone in the dark corner of a 24-hour diner in the next town over, the only place bright enough that I didn't feel like I was being swallowed whole. On the table, the tiny USB sat silently, like an unused bullet. And I was the one about to pull the trigger. I needed someone brave enough to broadcast this truth, someone who couldn't be bought, who didn't belong to any rotten system. In my earlier searches, I had read about a journalist named Rachel Ashby, fired from a major newspaper after investigating private psychiatric facilities, including the Halbrook Foundation. Branded as a fraud, she still operated under the radar, showing up on whistleblower forums and anti-corruption podcasts. I wrote a short email, no real name, just a temporary contact, and one simple message. I have proof of what you once investigated. Videos, reports, a living witness. Please help me, before I disappear like Claire Rothman. 1 hour later, I got a reply. So fast it gave me chills. Meet me, no phones, no social media, last cabin on Forest Ridge Road, midnight. Don't take the direct route. My stomach tightened reading the words. Like something out of a spy movie. But I knew this wasn't a game anymore. It was a war to bring truth into the light. I took a bus to the town of Forest Ridge, then walked 2 more hours through dense pine forest to reach the cabin. The sky was pitch black, wind rustling through the trees like whispers from the dead. The cabin emerged through the mist, dim yellow light glowing from a single window. Rachel was already on the porch, gray-streaked hair tied back, holding a steaming mug of coffee. She didn't greet me, just nodded and motioned for me to come inside. The cabin interior was a maze of documents, pinboards, voice recorders, maps with moldy edges and red strings connecting clues. On the table sat an old laptop, protected by multiple encryption layers. Rachel pulled out a chair and looked at me, her eyes sharp like a scalpel. Show me what you've got. I handed her the USB, my hand slightly shaking. She plugged it in, eyes fixed on the screen as the folders loaded. Patient logs, experimental notes, video sessions, EV reports. She opened the first video. The screen showed a woman tied to a metal chair, eyes wide, lips mumbling. A male voice spoke from off-camera. Elena, do you remember why you're here? I turned away, unable to watch. Rachel didn't. She stared, lips pressed into a hard line. No one could fake this, she muttered. The footage style, the encoded format, that voice. This is from the internal system. And here. She pointed at the file name. EV-17. You're the child they took from Elena, aren't you? I nodded. They adopted me as a success story from their behavioral restructuring program. They thought my mother wouldn't survive to tell her side. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She stood and walked over to a large pinboard covered with photos. One of them was Claire Rothman. A young face with bright eyes, beside a clipped newspaper headline. Mystery disappearance. Student investigating psychiatric facility, never returned. Claire called me 2 years ago, Rachel said. She told me she was about to uncover what you and I are holding now. But before we could meet, she vanished. I swallowed hard. I won't let that happen to my mother. Or to me. Rachel turned, eyes blazing like sparks. We won't let it happen. But we have to be smart. If you release this the wrong way, they'll erase everything, including you. We planned through the night. Rachel copied the contents of the USB onto 6 separate drives. Each one would be sent to a different address. 2 human rights lawyers. A former federal prosecutor. A popular podcast. An independent investigative outlet. And a whistleblower protection platform. Each recipient would get a unique password, delivered through encrypted channels. This is how you kill a monster, Rachel said. By making it impossible for it to hide. Before sunrise, we completed the full report. Dossier EV, the illegal experimentation system on women, by the Halbrook Foundation. Every page was supported with evidence, documents, excerpts from Elena's journal, and surveillance footage. I left the cabin at dawn, the first rays of sunlight brushing the treetops. I knew the moment those packages were opened, the battle would begin. I also knew, from that moment on, there would be no turning back. But for the first time I felt I was standing on the right side. My mother, and everyone like her, needed me. I woke up Tuesday morning to a voicemail from an unknown number. The voice in my ear was sharp as a freshly honed blade. "Amelia, I know what you're doing, we need to talk, you owe me that much." I froze in the middle of the nearly empty cafe, my cup of cold tea trembling in sync with my hand. I had expected it, I knew it would come, but still, the chill that crept into every fiber of my body couldn't be stopped. Robert Calloway, the man I once called father, knew. And now he wanted a meeting. Rachel told me not to go. She said I was stepping into the gray zone. A space controlled by people who would erase anyone who challenged them. But I knew I had to face him. Not because he deserved answers, but because I deserved closure to the nightmare that had stretched over 18 years. I chose a public location, the abandoned train station in Edgewater. It still had security cameras, a few overnight guards, and enough light to make any potential threat hesitate. I arrived 10 minutes early. My heart raced. In my bag were a printed copy of the report, an empty USB, and a phone with a recorder already running. Robert showed up on time, like he was walking into a board meeting. Same high-end beige coat, pale blue dress shirt buttoned neatly. His face revealed no cracks. Just the calm mask of someone who had buried too many scandals without leaving a trace. "You look grown up," he said, stepping closer. "Didn't expect that, honestly." I'd been stand. I looked at him like a filthy file I had reread too many times in the dark. "You know why I'm here, Robert, skip the small talk." He smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Still stubborn, just like her. Her? I tilted my head, voice low and sharp. "You mean Elena? My biological mother? The woman you helped lock up like an animal for nearly 2 decades? He sighed, as if I were inconveniencing some grand plan of his. "This, Amelia? It's beyond your understanding. If you make everything public, you won't just ruin a few reputations. You'll burn down an entire system. And the system fights back." I laughed, no joy in the sound. "Are you threatening me?" "No," he said gently. "I'm warning you. There are people whose names you don't know, but they know exactly who you are. They know where your mother is. If you think you'll be safe after this..." "What then?" I cut in. "They'll disappear me like they did Claire Rothman?" Robert paused. For a split second, something in his face twitched. I had hit the nerve. Claire got too close, too fast. "Unlike you," he said, his voice dropping. "You still have a way out, walk away. Take it all down before it's too late." I stood. The station lights hit his face. The mask of morality he'd worn for years. This time, I wasn't looking at him as a daughter desperate for love. I was looking at him as a witness staring into the eyes of a man who had committed atrocities. "There's nothing left to take down, Robert. It's already been sent. Backs up. Scheduled to go live. Even if I vanish tomorrow, the truth won't." He clenched his fist, the first sign of losing control. "You think you've won?" "No," I said. "I've set it free." I turned and walked away. No one stopped me. No voice called me back. But I knew, in that moment, I had cut the final thread tethering me to a manipulated past. To the man who once used power to bend an entire life. On the way back, my phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from Rachel. Podcasts live. The paper's running the first article. Twitter's blowing up. "We did it, Amelia." I opened the first link. The cover image was a blurry photo of my mother, Elena, tied to a chair in a dark room. The headline stretched across the screen. Evie 17. Experiments on vulnerable women. And the daughter who became a witness. The article began with a chilling audio excerpt I had heard in the video. "Do you remember why you're here, Elena? Because I know what you don't want anyone else to know." I sank onto a bench by the road. My hands covering my face. I started this story with nothing but empty hands. Now, I'd become the voice of my mother, of Claire, and of the women who were drowned in silence. And we just spoke out. The news broke like a mine collapse, sudden, violent, and no one had time to react. Within 48 hours of Rachel Ashby's podcast airing, a flood of articles, videos, documents and images from my USB swept across major platforms. The Halbrook Foundation, once praised as a sanctuary saving women in crisis, was now a name synonymous with psychological torture, illegal experimentation, and the concealment of human lives. Footage of my mother strapped to a chair, records clearly stating that patients disappeared after non-compliant treatment. None of it could be denied. The media dubbed it the EV-17 files, and I, Amelia Hartwell, was identified as the child born in darkness, now the torchbearer of truth. 3 days later, I returned to Ridgeview. This time, not in secret, not sneaking past cameras. The gate was no longer locked. A large sign hung outside. Temporarily closed for investigation. Medical staff moved in and out, their faces tense, bracing for what felt like a looming federal inspection. Janet met me in the lobby. She took my hand, tears welling up. "You did it, Amelia. Your mother will never be a shadow again." I nodded, unable to speak. My heart beat to one rhythm only. Find Elena, bring her home. We walked through the familiar hallways, this time without suspicious eyes or sterile coldness in the air. Room 12 was already open and my mother sat there, the last light of day casting warmth on her face, her hair gently brushed, her eyes wide as she saw me step in. I knelt beside her, holding the hand that had waited for too long. "Mom, we're free." Eleanor blinked. And for the first time in years, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I'd die here." "No, not anymore. Now, you're going to live. For the first time, we get to live without fear." 1 week later, Robert Calloway was urgently summoned by the Federal Investigation Committee. Soon after, the name Dr. Marcus Halbrook appeared on the indictment list, facing multiple charges: abuse of power, concealment of illegal activity, and forced medical experimentation. They tried to deny everything, like all the powerful do. But this time, the evidence was too overwhelming. The videos, audio recordings, testimonies from nurses and former employees, and dozens of unearthed missing patient files sparked an unprecedented lawsuit. Rachel updated me on every development through email. "There's no way out now. The Attorney General's office is filing criminal charges. They could be behind bars for life. Some of their partner hospitals are being shut down too." I read it with trembling hands. Not out of fear, but relief. The storm had finally come. And this time, it washed away the remains of all the lies. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice came through, raspy, hesitant. "Amelia? It's Claire. Claire Rothman." I froze in the middle of the street. "Claire, is it really you? Oh my God." I'd been living under a fake name in Oregon. After the break-in, I had to disappear. But I kept watching. When I saw what you did, I knew the time had come. I'm ready to come back. We met in Seattle, in a quiet alley bookstore. Claire still had that sharp look in her eyes, but she was thinner, more sun-kissed. She sat across from me and Elena, clutching a cup of hot coffee. "Thank you for not giving up, Amelia," she said. "You did what both your mother and I once thought was impossible." I looked at them. 2 women who had been buried by the system, erased from the world. Now sitting in front of me, alive, present and free. "We're not stopping," I said. "This story isn't just about one organization or a few bad people. It's the voice of those who had their right to exist stolen." Claire nodded, eyes red. "What's your plan?" I smiled and pulled a new folder from my bag. "The EV Foundation. Supporting women escaping psychological manipulation and systemic abuse. I want to build my own organization. For people like Mom. Like you. Like so many others who've lost their voices." Elena touched my hand, her eyes glowing with light. I'm proud of you, Amelia, not because you exposed the truth, but because you didn't let the pain turn you into hate. I smiled through tears. Mom, I only did one thing. Took back what belongs to us. Truth. Freedom. And a future that isn't controlled. The following spring, we stood in front of a new building. A reintegration center named the Hartwell Center, after my mother's name. Inside were counseling rooms, temporary housing, and an archive room dedicated to preserving the stories and evidence of those who were once forgotten. I looked up at the sky, where the sunlight felt brighter than ever. My journey began with abandonment on my 18th birthday. But now, I was rewriting the ending. For myself, for my mother, for Claire, and for everyone who had ever been silenced. My story began with rejection and buried secrets. But it ends with truth revealed and justice served. I lost a family, a childhood, and my faith. But in return, I found my birth mother, freed her from invisible chains, and reignited hope for those who had been forgotten. From a victim, I became the voice for the voiceless. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to stand up. And the truth can rise again. Strong enough to change an entire system. What do you think about Amelia's journey and the horrifying truth behind a seemingly perfect family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next emotional and unexpected real-life story. I once heard someone say, children who grow up in homes filled with shouting learn to whisper to survive. But that wasn't true for me. I didn't whisper. I went silent. So silent it was like I'd disappeared in my own home. Every click of high heels on the wooden floor made my heart clench. Every time my mother called my name, Evelyn! I had to guess what I'd done wrong this time. Back then, we lived in a small town called Flagstaff, Arizona, where every morning the smell of waffles and coffee from my dad's bakery would drift through the streets. His name was Patrick, the kindest man I've ever known, always busy in the little kitchen behind the counter. He loved baking so much that even when his knees ached, he still kneaded the dough by hand every morning. Meanwhile, my mother, Valerie, was a real estate agent, always walking out the door with perfectly brushed hair and a smile sharp as a razor. And me? I was 11, a shy bookworm who never knew how to please her. That night, as I was setting the table like I did every evening, I heard my mother's voice. Cold as steel. One more month without enough revenue, Patrick. Are you trying to ruin my life? I froze, still holding the fork. My dad looked up from a bill. Val, not in front of her, please. Oh, why not? She should know just how useless her father is, my mom scoffed, then turned to me, eyes sharp. Evelyn, where's the bottle of wine I put in the cabinet? I rushed off to get it, my hands trembling so badly I spilled a few drops on the table, just a few drops. But my mother looked at me like I'd smashed an antique vase. For God's sake, you can't even pour wine properly. You really didn't learn a thing from your failure of a father. I swallowed hard, forcing back tears. My dad started to get up to say something, but my mother just snapped her fingers dismissively. Sit down, Patrick, you're so weak you're letting her grow up to be just as useless. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat behind my slightly open bedroom door, listening to chairs scrape, my mother's angry voice, and my father trying to stay calm. Every word felt like a knife to my chest. I wished I could scream to make them stop. But I was just a silent little girl. The next morning the house was eerily quiet. No smell of bread, no clicking heels. Just my dad slumped over a cup of cold coffee, a handwritten letter on the table. I walked over and sat beside him. He didn't look at me. Just slid the paper toward me, and said something I'll never forget. Your mom, she's gone. My heart thundered as I picked up the note. Patrick, I've had enough. Richard can give me the life I deserve. I don't need this stupid bakery, this cheap house, or that bland, useless daughter of yours. Evelyn, don't come looking for me. Goodbye. I thought I'd scream, cry, get angry. But I just went numb. Some part of me had known this was coming. I just didn't expect it to be so cruel. The months that followed were endless. My father filed for divorce and sole custody. We sat in silence at the local courthouse, my small hand gripping his like I was scared of the dark. My mother never showed up. No apology. No final glance back. Eventually, the judge struck the gavel. Mrs. Valerie Miller is permanently stripped of custody. Full responsibility is awarded to Mr. Patrick Miller. This hearing is adjourned. My dad looked at me, eyes red but relieved. He squeezed my hand tight. It's just us now, Evelyn. I nodded. I didn't need a mother anymore. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that one day, that woman would return. Not to apologize, but to demand things she had never given. Life after my mother disappeared wasn't freedom. It was a void. A deep, endless hole where no one screamed at me, but no one walked through the door at dusk either. Flagstaff felt quieter, grayer, even on the brightest June days. I turned 12 with a small birthday cake Dad baked at midnight. He handed it to me while apologizing for burning one corner. Burnt or not, it still tastes great, I smiled, leaning in to hug him. That hug couldn't erase the exhaustion in his eyes, but it was something real. We lived frugally. No parties, no dining out. Dad worked 14 hours a day at the old bakery, and I picked up what he couldn't finish. Laundry, cleaning, dishwashing, taking orders when he was busy with customers. Even as a kid, I knew, if I didn't help, he might fall apart. The only thing that kept us going was Miller's Bakery, a little shop on South Beaver Street, where people lined up every morning for warm, buttery loaves. It was cramped and outdated, but it was my dad's whole world. Slowly, it became mine too. Then, in the fall of my 15th year, something unexpected happened. I remember it was a Wednesday. School delivery day. My dad came home. Pale like he'd seen a ghost. His words made me drop my glass. Uncle Jackson passed away. My throat tightened. Uncle Jackson was Dad's younger brother, lived in Oregon. They rarely spoke, but he sent postcards now and then. I'd never met him, but I knew they were close. One doctor said it was a brain aneurysm, sudden, no wife, no kids, no heirs. Dad collapsed into a chair, hands shaking. And he left everything to me, a savings account. Nearly $300,000, 0 cents. I was stunned. $300,000? It was so much I couldn't imagine how it might change our lives. But my dad could. A month later, Miller's Bakery had a whole new look. A modern kitchen, sparkling glass displays, and a brand new POS system at the register. My dad hired 2 new staff, Caleb and Jenny, one quick on his feet, the other detail-oriented. Both loved pastries, and didn't mind waking up at 4 o'clock a.m. Revenue nearly doubled in just 2 months. Word spread fast about the almond croissants that were the best in town. People even drove up from Sedona just to try them. One evening, while I was wiping down tables, my dad walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, eyes glowing. "What do you think about opening a second shop in Prescott?" I was stunned. "Another one, are you sure?" "I'm sure. We've gotten back up, Evelyn, now it's time to fly." When I was 16, our second bakery opened with a line that stretched all the way to the parking lot across the street. My dad stood in the crowd, wearing an apron with the Miller's logo, grinning like a kid who'd just got his first bike. And me? I gave my first ever speech. Short but full of pride. My mother once said I was a burden. But today, I didn't fall. I'm Patrick Miller's daughter, and I'm not going anywhere. All of Prescott applauded. I looked at my dad. He quietly wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Later that year we took a trip, a 10-day drive along the California coast. I saw the ocean for real. Not on TV, not in photos. I ate salmon patties in Monterey, watched sea lions at Pier 39 and, for once, felt like a normal person. The night before we headed back to Flagstaff, my dad said, "No matter how far things go, the bakery is where it all started, and you're the reason I never gave up." I hugged him in our tiny hotel room in Santa Cruz, my chest tight with both gratitude and sadness. We had lost so much to get here. But for the first time, I could imagine a future without fear. What I didn't know was that those peaceful years wouldn't last. Because the ghosts of the past never really left me. I left home on my 18th birthday. Not because I wanted to escape my father, but because I knew he wanted to see me fly further than the red brick walls where Miller's Bakery began. Arizona State University, majoring in finance, that was the door I'd opened after 3 years of burning the candle at both ends. But I had no idea what gift my dad had prepared for me that morning. He handed me a small box, wrapped in old newspaper and tied with brown twine. I opened it, and my heart nearly stopped. A key. 3rd floor apartment, 10 minutes walk from your campus, not too big, but enough for a proper start, he smiled. You won't have to live with loud roommates. I froze. My eyes stung. Dad, why would you? You've worked harder than anyone. I just want you to not worry about housing, so you can focus on school. Use this to build something of your own, Evelyn. That apartment, with its exposed brick walls, large windows, and tiny kitchen, became my first sanctuary in adulthood. I learned to manage everything, from changing light bulbs to paying property tax. At first, it overwhelmed me. But I swore I wouldn't let my dad down. 4 years of college passed in a blur. Morning classes, afternoon shifts at an accounting office, late night studying. I didn't allow myself to waste time. My college life had no parties, no reckless dates. I invested my time into textbooks, analysis reports, and every meeting with academic advisors. And when I graduated, I stood on the stage with honors, looking down at my dad. His hands clenched, eyes wet. After graduation, I started my first job at a financial firm in Phoenix, as a junior investment analyst. It wasn't flashy, and the pay wasn't great, but I knew it was a stepping stone. I didn't splurge like my peers. I stayed in my old apartment and saved every dollar from my paycheck. And when I got my first bonus, exactly $4,300, 0 cents, I didn't buy a handbag or book a vacation. I invested. A small apartment, 20 minutes outside the city, modestly priced, in a quiet neighborhood. I fixed it up myself, painted walls, changed the lights, scrubbed the bathrooms. After 2 months, I rented it out. That's where it started, small but steady. Every year after that I saved, budgeted, and looked for neglected properties. I turned them into dream homes for others. By the time I was 32, I owned 4 apartments. 3 rented out, 1 I lived in. All under my name. No mortgage, no one else's help. I still remember how I felt signing the papers for the 4th one, not pride, but a quiet kind of freedom. Like I'd finally carved an escape route from a suffocating past. My father was always my silent supporter. He never asked much, just sent regular texts. Are you getting enough sleep? Don't skip breakfast. Busy day at the bakery, everyone asks about you. I don't get the stock market, but I know you know what you're doing. Every time I read his messages, I wanted to cry. But I didn't let myself break. I had work to do. I wanted a future where, if anyone asked, who helped Evelyn Miller rise? I could say, me. And the one father who never gave up on me. One day in March, I sat in my home office, a little nook in my latest apartment, reviewing my portfolio. Net worth, cash flow, ROI. All trending upward. I made myself an espresso and placed my hand on a small photo frame on the shelf. It was a picture of me and Dad in front of the original bakery when I was 17, holding a baguette longer than my arm. Dad, I whispered. We did it. I thought life had finally settled. Then the call came. A voice I thought was buried forever echoed on the other end of the line. Evelyn, it's Mom. I'm in Flagstaff. I want to see you. I gripped the phone, heart pounding. the woman who tore my childhood apart, was back. And this time, she wasn't alone. I thought I'd overcome everything. That a phone call from the mother who abandoned me would be just a scratch. Not enough to shake the world I built with blood, tears, and tireless years. But I was wrong. Just when I thought I had control of my life, something else dragged me down, not the past, but the present. That afternoon I got a call from my dad's doctor. His voice was low and heavy as stone. "Evelyn, your father needs to go to the hospital, now." I left the office like I was in a trance. Drove 3 hours back to Flagstaff, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But none of them compared to the truth I heard when I walked into the hospital room. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I went numb. It felt like a punch to the chest. Dad sat there, propped up on pillows, smiling faintly but pale. "Don't look at me like the world's ending. It's still spinning. I just won't be on it much longer." "You talk like this is no big deal," I choked. "Don't you get I can't lose you?" He squeezed my hand, now much thinner than before. "Evelyn? I'm not immortal, but you can do something that lasts forever. Live by the values we built." In the months that followed, I lived 2 lives. By day, a successful investor with spreadsheets and contracts. By night, a daughter stirring porridge, wiping sweat, and rubbing her father's back through the pain. Dad refused chemotherapy. He chose light treatment to extend time, not to cling to a fragile hope. Instead, he rewrote every document. The will, transfers, investment accounts. He called the lawyer, the accountant, even the bank representative, to come to our house. One late autumn afternoon, he pulled me close to the bed. "I sold the bakery." I froze. "You sold it? But you loved it. And I love you more. The bakery was my past. But you're the future. That money will help you build your own empire. Don't look back. Keep going." I said nothing, I just cried. 7 months after the diagnosis, on a Monday morning, I walked in with soup. And found him, no longer awake. He passed in silence, still holding the handkerchief I'd embroidered with "Dad" when I was 12. The funeral was held on a cold, misty afternoon. I stood alone, wearing the only black dress I owned, watching as his casket was lowered. The only man who never abandoned me had left. After the service, our family lawyer, Mr. Simmons, handed me a thick folder. The entire estate, including the bakery sale, savings, and the investment portfolio Dad had built in recent years, was left to me. Total value is approximately $820,000, 0 cents, he said. "Mr. Patrick wanted you to continue the path you two began with the first bakery." I sat alone in Dad's apartment, taking it all in. The chair he used to sit in, the apron still dusted with flour. The photos I'd pinned up that he never took down. I thought I'd fall apart. But I didn't. I didn't break. I used part of the estate to purchase an old apartment complex in West Phoenix. Once abandoned, now listed for next to nothing. I hired a renovation crew and oversaw every detail myself. 3 months later, Patrick Heights opened. 36 units, each one a statement. I was not just some abandoned child. I was a legacy of a great man, in my own way. I began receiving invitations to speak at finance events. The media dubbed me Phoenix's real estate golden girl. But labels didn't matter as much as what I felt each morning, standing in front of a mirror, seeing someone no longer defined by pain. I lived by one truth: everything I had was built with my own hands, and with the unconditional love of a father. And just when I started to believe I could finally live in peace, the shadows returned. My mother, Valerie, the voice behind that earlier call, didn't come back just with apologies. She came back with demands. I had gotten used to silence. No one yelling my name in anger, no dishes clattering every evening. After Dad's death, that silence became a shield. The only thing that kept me sane through a grief that felt bottomless. Then she called. My phone rang just as I was reviewing new lease applications at Patrick Heights. The screen showed an unfamiliar number from Prescott. I nearly didn't answer. But some ghost of my past, made me pick up. Evelyn? It's Mom, it's Valerie. I'm back in Arizona. I want to see you, if you'll allow it. I went cold. 20 seconds passed, maybe more. What do you want? I wasn't naive enough to ask why now. Her voice cracked. I regret everything, and there's someone else, someone I think you should meet. We agreed to meet at an old coffee shop near downtown Flagstaff, where Dad used to read the newspaper on Sundays. I arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner. My hands were sweaty despite the cold October air. At exactly noon, the door opened. Valerie walked in. Same styled blonde hair. Same sharp eyes, but more wrinkles, and an unsteady gait. And behind her, a girl maybe 17. Nervous eyes, face slightly lowered, clutching the strap of her backpack like it was a shield. Evelyn, this is Lily, your sister. Those words hit like a slap. Soft but sharp. I said nothing. Lily looked up, her eyes unsure whether to see me as family or a stranger. We sat. Valerie spoke. With a voice full of regret. That after running off with Richard, he left her not long after Lily was born. That she worked small real estate jobs, made little money and lived hard. That Lily never had stability. And now she wanted to return to Flagstaff, to start over. I heard, you own a few properties. If you have a vacant unit, I just want a place to stay. I'll pay for electricity, water, I promise. I looked at Lily. She sat quietly, saying nothing, but her eyes were filled with shame. I remembered a 12-year-old Evelyn, holding a note that said, "You're a burden." And I remembered a father who once told me, "Even if others choose to leave, don't lose your kindness." I sighed. There's one unit open, small place, first floor behind the shared courtyard. You and Lily can stay there. No rent, just cover your utilities. For now. Valerie lit up, almost crying. You're so kind. I don't expect forgiveness right away. But I'm grateful. I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't something I handed out easily. But I could start by not becoming her. The following weeks were strange. I kept my distance from my mother. More accurately, the woman who gave birth to me. But with Lily, it was different. She often sat outside reading. One time I brought her coffee and asked, "What are you reading?" The Great Gatsby. My teacher assigned it, but I like it. It's sad, but beautiful. I sat beside her and handed her a hot cocoa. If you ever need help studying for the SAT, I can help, or if you're curious about finance or investing, I've got a few good books. Lily looked at me hesitantly, then smiled. Thanks, no one's ever said that to me before. I knew. Because I used to be her. We weren't a family. Not yet. But, between Lily and me, small connections began to form. A grocery run together. An afternoon picking old books at the flea market. A late night, goodnight text. I still kept my guard up around Valerie. She was always polite, grateful, humble. But something felt off. As if every thank you was setting the stage for something bigger. I thought, maybe I was being paranoid. I was wrong. Very wrong. On Lily's high school graduation day, the Flagstaff sky was oddly clear. I sat alone in the back row of the school courtyard, clutching a small bouquet, my heart pounding as I watched her walk onto the stage. In the sunlight, Lily glowed. I felt proud, not because of anything I'd done, but because she had risen above the wreckage she never asked for. Valerie sat near the front row. She laughed loudly, clapped hard, as if she had been the one to help Lily through it all. I said nothing. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because it wasn't time yet. I thought maybe, just maybe, things between us could finally end in peace. I was wrong. Just one day after the graduation, Valerie showed up at my doorstep. Unannounced, without a greeting. "We need to talk," she said, chin raised, walking in like she still owned the place. I crossed my arms, standing between her and the living room. "About what?" Valerie placed her bag on the couch and pulled out a folder. "Lily's been accepted to the University of Oregon biology program. First-year tuition is close to $28,000, 0 cents. Add housing, books, travel, the total's about $40, 0 cents. I didn't respond. She went on. "You own 4 apartments, selling just one could cover Lily's education." I let out a small bitter laugh. Sell a property to pay tuition for the daughter of the woman who called me a burden in her goodbye letter? "Stop dragging up the past," she snapped. "I told you, I regret it. But I'm still your mother, and Lily is your sister." "No," I said coldly. "You legally gave up your rights as a mother. The court confirmed that. And Lily, she's not my responsibility. I care about her, but I don't owe you, or anyone, a dime." Valerie stood up, eyes red but mouth curled. "Ambition has blinded you to your own blood. Honestly, I shouldn't have expected gratitude from a child raised without knowing it." I pointed to the door. "Leave my house, now." 3 days later, the whispers started. First, cryptic Facebook posts from her. "It's heartbreaking to be turned away by your own blood. A successful daughter, so cold she leaves her mother and little sister in despair." I ignored it. Then came the messages. From old classmates, my mother's former colleagues, even acquaintances. "Is it true you're not helping your mom and sister? Heard you have 4 apartments, can't sell one so your sister can go to college. How can you live with yourself knowing your mom writes things that painful?" Each message felt like a blade. But I kept quiet. Until the post went viral. A long emotionally manipulative piece. "My daughter, Evelyn Miller, owns at least 4 properties in Phoenix, yet she refuses to spend a cent to help her sister attend college. She even demands I pay utilities while I'm unemployed. As a mother, it breaks my heart to see greed erase everything." Attached were photos of my apartment buildings, pictures of Lily, even a shot of me smiling, cropped and edited to make me look cold and cruel. The comments poured in like a flood. "Disgusting. A snake disguised as a daughter. No one deserves to be treated like that by their own child." I was called into HR just 2 days later. My boss, Mr. Blake, looked at me with a heavy expression. "Evelyn, we don't usually interfere in personal matters, but the company's now being dragged into this. We need you to resolve it, quickly, and quietly." I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. That night, I sat at home, opened my computer and stared at my investment dashboard. 4 rental properties, stable cash flow, a new expansion plan awaiting approval. Everything I had built was now at risk. Because a woman who once treated me like garbage wanted to squeeze me dry again. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. "I need to know my legal rights regarding someone living rent-free in property I own. Miss Evelyn, if there's no official lease, no rent payments, and you've issued a written warning, you absolutely have the right to evict." "Good, prepare the paperwork." I was no longer the girl crying behind a bedroom door. I was Evelyn Miller, the woman who would protect everything she had built. I sent a formal notice about unpaid utility bills early that week. Polite, procedural, without malice. Valerie didn't respond. 3 days later, I called. She picked up for barely 3 seconds. "Hey, what? You've got money, don't you? A few $100 means nothing to you." I gripped the phone, still calm. "We had an agreement, no rent, but you'd cover living expenses. I have message transcripts confirming that." "I'm your mother, Evelyn," she growled. "You're really counting dollars with the woman who gave birth to you?" I answered flatly. "I'm not counting dollars. I'm following the law." My attorney, Mark Denham, a sharp-spoken man in his 40s, fully supported filing the eviction. "No contract, no payment, no revised terms. That's a breach of tenancy law. She has no right to occupy your property." She'll fight it, I said. Mark smirked. I hope she does. We spent 2 weeks preparing. I handed over everything: message screenshots, utility bills, before and after photos of the apartment. But the strongest piece of evidence was the court document from when I was 12. The official ruling stripping Valerie Miller of her parental rights. When Mark saw it, his eyes narrowed slightly. Game over. On the day of the hearing, it rained. I arrived early, sitting quietly on a cold wooden bench in the waiting room. Valerie entered later, heavily made up in a deep red velvet dress. Still poised but with a trace of unease in her eyes. Lily walked behind her, not looking at me, clutching a small notebook with both hands. The hearing began. Valerie played the victim from her very first words. Your Honor, I'm just a mother abandoned by her daughter. I have no home, no one beside me but Lily and... Evelyn? She's turned her heart to stone. She's forgotten I gave birth to her. I didn't react. I focused on Mark. When it was his turn, he stood, pulling out a stamped photocopy. Your Honor, this is a certified copy of the ruling from the Coconino County Family Court in Arizona, dated November 19, when Evelyn was 12 years old. Mrs. Valerie Miller was stripped of parental rights due to abandonment of a minor, failure to provide child support, and no contact for over 2 years. The courtroom went silent. Mark wasn't done. In addition, we have notarized real estate documents showing Mrs. Miller currently owns an apartment in Prescott, inherited from a former partner. This apartment is being used as a short-term rental, generating an average monthly income of approximately $1,200.00, according to reports from the Airstay platform. Valerie's eyes widened. That's personal property, it's irrelevant. Mark didn't back down. Then I ask, why would someone with private housing and steady income willfully occupy a property owned by a former daughter, someone who has not been legally tied to her for over 20 years? The judge glanced down at the file. Her gaze was sharp as a blade. Mrs. Miller, do you have anything else to say? Valerie stammered, then lowered her head. I just wanted what's best for Lily. We're not here to discuss Lily today, the judge interrupted. We are addressing the unlawful occupation and exploitation of private property, and... I've seen enough. She brought the gavel down. The court rules in favor of Evelyn Miller. Mrs. Valerie Miller is ordered to vacate the property within 30 days and repay outstanding utility costs totaling $3,487.00. Court is adjourned. I stood, gripping my case file tightly. My eyes met Lily's. She wasn't like Valerie. She couldn't lie the way her mother did. Her face was tight, her lips trembling. I walked over. Lily. She looked up, eyes red. I'm sorry for dragging you into this, but I have to protect what took me a lifetime to build. If one day you need help, for you, not for anyone else, call me. She nodded, silent. A week later, Valerie moved out. I wasn't there. I didn't need to hear more excuses. I changed the locks, repaired the unit, and took down every last family photo. I wanted the walls clean, not just physically, but emotionally. I had reached the limit of my patience, and in the end, I won. Not out of spite, but with clarity. But sitting in that empty apartment, staring out over the city at night, I realized something. True freedom doesn't come from defeating anyone. It comes when no one has power over your life anymore. I didn't say goodbye. Valerie and Lily left the apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, per notice from the building management. I left a sealed envelope in the kitchen drawer, a short handwritten letter, expecting no reply. In it I wrote, Lily, I hope you get to live a life free of blame for things that were never your fault. I don't know what your future holds, but if one day you need someone in your corner, know that I never turned my back on you. Valerie, I have nothing left to give, and nothing left to lose. What you cut out of my life, I didn't just patch up. I built an entire world from it, and in that world, you no longer have a place. Signed, Evelyn Miller. Folded shut. 3 days later I returned to the apartment. It was silent. empty. No more belongings, no sound of vacuums, no cheap scented candles Valerie used to burn. Just sunlight slanting through the windows, and the wind gently tapping at the glass. I took off my shoes, stepping barefoot on the cold wooden floor. Each step felt like a long exhale. I stood in the living room, once the symbol of pain, hope, and betrayal, and now, just space. No more passive-aggressive comments. No more fake affection. No more warped love dressed in family ties. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I had no tears left for someone who once treated me as a roadblock in her life. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. I remembered all the times I'd tried to get it right, only to be met with a cold shake of the head. The first time I used my bonus to buy a suit, Valerie just said, "Not bad. You look a little less small town now." I remembered lying to classmates at reunions, saying, "My mom's on a long business trip," while they passed around family photos. I remembered the night I received Arizona's Young Finance Leader Award, just applause from strangers, while Valerie posted a sob story online. But I also remembered Dad sitting at the kitchen table, teaching me compound these simple interests using cookie crumbs, slipping chocolates into my backpack before every semester exam, and the words I'd never forget. Freedom doesn't come from being unbound, it comes from knowing your own boundaries. I stood, opened the window. The wind carried in the scent of grass and the dampness of the city at night. I picked up my phone, opened my last conversation with Lily. Her final message. "I'm sorry, I didn't know it was that bad." I replied. "It's okay, it's not your fault, live well." Then, I deleted the entire thread. I needed to close that door. Not because I hated her, but because I couldn't let anyone, not even an innocent one, become a bridge to everything I had fought to tear down. I saved my lawyer's number, the court ruling, every piece of evidence. Not for revenge, but as a reminder. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. Boundaries are radical self-love. A week later, I rented out the apartment to a young nurse who had just started working at the city hospital. She looked me in the eye during the interview and said something that reminded me of my younger self. "I just need a quiet place to begin. The rest, I'll work for on my own." I nodded, handed her the keys, and knew I had made the right choice. That night, I returned to my own apartment, where the photo of me and Dad still sat on the table, framed between two small cacti. I poured myself a glass of red wine, turned on some jazz. I stepped onto the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer beneath me, watching Phoenix curl into silence. No more Valerie. No more fear of abandonments. No more dreams of fixing a family that had shattered long before I even knew what love was. I whispered, like a quiet ritual, "I forgive my mother, but I will not let her back in." And then, I smiled. A smile no longer weighed down by bitterness. Just the smile of someone finally, truly free. Evelyn's story is proof that not everyone who gives you life deserves to walk beside you for the rest of it. Some relationships, no matter how deeply tied by blood, are the root of hurt and manipulation. True growth doesn't come from blind forgiveness. It comes from learning to set boundaries and choosing to protect yourself. Evelyn didn't win because she was wealthy. She won because she dared to say enough to injustice and chose to live a life she owned completely, no longer bowed to the past. What do you think about Evelyn's journey? Would you do the same in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful real-life stories about family and boundaries. I never thought I'd find myself sobbing over a $15 inhaler. But last night, there I was, collapsed on the kitchen floor, prescription for my son still in hand, overwhelmed by a wave of helplessness. Even a sudden winter breeze could land my son in the emergency room. And if I couldn't scrape together enough money for his medication, that scenario might become reality this very week. Sometimes I wonder, was it a mistake to try motherhood like this, alone, quietly, slowly wearing myself out? My name is Alice Monroe. I'm 31 years old, a single mother to Ethan, a 7-year-old boy with big brown eyes and weak lungs that have kept me on constant alert, 24/7 for years. Ethan's father left when he was just 2, claiming he needed a fresh start in Arizona, and then disappeared, leaving behind a box of toys, a few empty promises, and child support payments barely enough to cover half a month's asthma medication. I work an administrative job at a small law office outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's not my dream job, but it pays the rent for our one-bedroom apartment, lets Ethan attend the nearby public elementary school, and covers basic necessities, as long as I meticulously budget every cent. Eating out or traveling is an unreachable luxury. Buying coffee each morning? Forget it. I've learned to brew cheap instant coffee, drinking it from an old ceramic mug I've had since college. I'm trying to get promoted to executive assistant, not because I crave prestige, I don't need people to praise me as successful, but because a higher salary might finally ease the constant anxiety that grips me every time Ethan coughs at night. I've worked overtime for 3 straight months, accepted every project others refused, and willingly spent weekends at the office. My supervisor, Sharon, once hinted I was the top candidate for the next promotion, but I know that just one small misstep could erase that opportunity forever. And for me, opportunities don't come knocking twice. I don't have a built-in babysitter. I don't have grandparents nearby to lend a hand. I don't have a boyfriend to share the burden. There's just me. And Ethan. Ethan's asthma isn't severe enough to be life-threatening, but it's bad enough to make my heart jump every time I hear his wheezing. He seems more aware of our situation than most kids his age, diligently carrying his inhaler in his backpack and expertly operating the nebulizer whenever needed. But there are nights when, despite his medication, Ethan still struggles to sleep because of chest tightness, and me, I just sit beside him, watching the clock, counting every breath. Medication costs keep rising. Recently, the new inhaler Ethan's doctor prescribed costs nearly $180 per vial, and my insurance won't fully cover it. I had to ask the doctor for a cheaper alternative, even though I know it isn't as effective. Leaving the pharmacy, I clutched the bill with trembling hands, wondering if I could even make it through this month. I know some people might say, why don't you ask your parents for help? But it's not that simple. My parents live just a 30-minute drive away, in a 2-story home with a backyard and 2 dogs. They vacation every season, dine out at least 3 times a week, and regularly post photos of weekend cocktail parties. They're not poor, but they've always viewed my life as a result of my poor choices. They never say it directly, but in my mother's eyes, I see the clear message. You chose to be a single mom, now deal with it. Yet sometimes, when Ethan runs a high fever and I'm up all night monitoring his asthma, I still call my mom. I hate begging, but my son needs care. I need someone to be there so I can go to work, keep my job, hold on to my chance at a promotion. I tell myself, just this one time. It'll be okay afterward, but just this one time keeps happening again and again. And the most recent incident was the moment I finally understood. Some loved ones are there only when they need you, not when you need them. I don't know where things will end up, but I know one thing for sure. If I fall, there won't be anyone reaching out to catch me, and if that makes me cold, it's not because I want to be, but because I have no choice. I got the email Monday morning. The subject line flashed clearly on the screen. Interview confirmation. Executive assistant position. Immediately my heart raced. I had to read it 3 times before I believed that, after all my efforts, I finally had the chance to climb one step higher. Possibly a turning point that could change life for Ethan and me. The interview was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Friday, lasting about 45 minutes. It was perfect timing. Ethan would be at school, and I could take a short break, returning to work by 4:05. I'd prepared everything, updated my resume, picked out a pale blue shirt and a classic black skirt, and practiced mock questions every evening after Ethan fell asleep. I'd never felt so determined. If I passed this round, my salary would increase by $7,000 per year. Enough that I wouldn't need to count every dollar at the grocery store or ask the doctor to prescribe cheaper medication for Ethan. But fate seems to love mocking those who dare to hope for something better. Wednesday evening, while I was folding laundry, I heard Ethan coughing from his bedroom. Not a mild cough from a cold or slight flu. It was a deep, dry, desperate cough, as if someone were slowly squeezing his throat. I rushed into the room to find Ethan with red-rimmed eyes and a face drenched in sweat. He was fighting for air, each breath sounding painfully wheezy. Enk. I didn't need a doctor to tell me what was happening. Another asthma attack. I'd faced this many times, but it still made my heart clench every time. I set up the nebulizer, sitting next to him all night, carefully counting his breaths. The next morning, Ethan's fever spiked to 101.8 degrees. The pediatrician confirmed exactly what I'd suspected, an acute asthma episode combined with a mild infection. He prescribed steroids and ordered Ethan to rest at least 48 hours, avoiding all triggers. No school, no going out, and certainly don't leave him alone, he stated firmly. I nodded, though I knew exactly what that meant for my interview on Friday. The moment I got Ethan home and gave him his medication, I grabbed my phone. I just needed 2 hours Friday afternoon, not the whole day, not the weekend, just 2 hours. I called my mom. She answered after the fourth ring, sounding rushed. Mom, Ethan's having an asthma attack and running a high fever. I can't send him to school on Friday. Can you come over and watch him for just 2 hours? I have a very important interview. There was a silence on the other end, so long I had to check if the call had disconnected. Then my mother spoke. Her voice soft as a whisper but cold as ice. Oh, Alice, Friday's busy for me. I have a hair appointment in the morning and your dad and I have the Hendersons' anniversary party in the afternoon. My schedule's been set all week, you know that. Mom, just 2 hours. I've already taken the day off, I just need exactly those 2 hours. I'll have everything ready, Ethan just needs to rest. All you have to do is stay here, in case something happens. My mother sighed, a sigh that made me feel like a troublesome child disturbing her parents' perfect lives. Alice, you need to learn how to prioritize. Motherhood isn't easy, I understand, but you can't call me every time there's a crisis. I already raised you. Now it's your turn. I bit my lip so hard it bled, feeling each of her words cut into the resilience I'd built up over the years. If you can't make it Friday, let it go. Anyway, Sunday evening, your dad and I want you and Ethan over for dinner. I'm making your favorite beef stew. Let's not get upset over something small. Something small? My entire financial future, the only opportunity I'd gotten after 4 years of endurance and effort, was something small? I hung up, my hands trembling. Then I called everyone I knew, neighbors, close friends, even the parents of Ethan's classmates. No one was free on Friday afternoon, no one close enough for me to feel safe leaving my sick son in their care. I called the office, leaving messages for my manager and HR, begging them to reschedule the interview to Monday, clearly explaining my situation. But Friday morning, I received a cold email from HR. Unfortunately, interview schedules cannot be changed due to recruitment timelines. We wish you luck in future opportunities. I collapsed onto the kitchen table. Ethan was resting on the sofa, breathing more gently now, holding his old stuffed bear. But me? I couldn't breathe. My opportunity, the one I'd dreamed about for months, had slipped away because of 2 hours. Because of one refusal. At exactly 4 p.m., my mom texted me. How did the interview go? Hope you managed it. I stared at the screen, an icy chill creeping up my spine. I didn't reply. I had never felt so alone, and never felt so angry. On Sunday morning, while Ethan was still engrossed in cartoons in the living room, I stood alone in the kitchen, gripping my phone. My mom's text from Friday was still there, unanswered. Every time I looked at the screen, my chest tightened. At first it was pain, but now, it was anger. Resentment. The feeling that the whole world was determined to rip away every last effort I'd made. I dialed the number. Mom answered after 2 rings. Her voice was smooth as silk, as if nothing had happened. Alice, finally, you called back. I assume the interview went well? I took a deep breath. The words came out of my throat like a hammer blow. I couldn't go to the interview, Mom. I missed the only chance I had to provide my son with a better life, just because no one could help me for exactly 2 hours. There was a brief silence. Then my mom spoke slowly, calmly, as if reading off the party menu. You know, Alice, I think you might be relying on me a bit too much. Being a single mother is hard, I know, but that's the path you chose. I stood motionless in the bright kitchen, yet everything inside felt dark. I clenched my jaw, forcing my voice to stay steady. You call that relying? I've asked you for help exactly once in the last 6 months. Who drove Dad 3 times a week for 2 months to physical therapy last year? Who spent hours fixing your phones, your smart TV, assembling furniture after your move? My mother laughed, a dry, emotionless laugh. Those are things you should do. Families help each other, Alice. Haven't your father and I always been there for you? I laughed bitterly, the sarcasm in my voice sharper than any blade. Been there for me? You mean like Ethan's birthday last year, when you missed it because you had a golf tournament in Maryland? Or 2 years ago, when I asked you to watch Ethan for exactly 3 hours so I could interview for that internship, and you told me you couldn't miss your cooking show? My mom's tone shifted. It wasn't soft anymore. You're insulting your parents, Alice. We've done everything to raise you properly, given you a good education, and now you're blaming us because I didn't sacrifice one party? I gripped the phone tightly, trembling with anger. At this point, I couldn't hold back anymore. You never sacrifice anything, you only demand. While I'm struggling to carry everything alone, raising my son, counting every dollar to afford his medication, working overtime for a chance at promotion. You're vacationing, upgrading your sound system, buying new cars, and now you call me dependent. My mother didn't respond right away. Then she spoke quietly, like a breeze skimming over a lake, yet it struck me like thunder on a clear day. If it's such a burden, don't expect us to help anymore. But don't expect our financial support either. I froze. Financial support? Since when had I received financial support from them? The question burst from my mouth, low and rumbling like distant thunder. Financial support? Are you referring to Ethan's $25 birthday gifts, or that t-shirt you sent with the 70% discount tag still attached? My father's voice interjected in the background, deep and stern. Alice, watch your tone. Your mother's right. Everything in your life is your own choice. We're not obligated to carry the consequences of your decisions. If you chose to be a single mother, you should be strong enough to handle everything yourself. I felt dizzy. Leaning against the refrigerator, my palms turned ice cold. Then I said quietly, yet firmly, emphasizing each word clearly. In that case, don't call me anymore when you need help scheduling doctor's appointments, fixing your computers, going to the bank, or moving furniture. I owe you nothing. Without waiting for a reply, I hung up. My face burned hot. My heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would burst out of my chest. 30 seconds later, my phone vibrated. A text from my mother. If this is the path you choose, don't be surprised when we cut ties completely. Families are meant to support each other, not endure insults like that. I stared blankly at the screen, hollow inside. Then I deleted the message without replying. That day, I did something I should have done long ago. I blocked both of my parents' phone numbers. I thought after that last call they would stay quiet, at least for a while. But just 3 days later, my mother returned, with a completely new tactic. That evening, as I was preparing boxed mac and cheese for Ethan, a luxury meal in our tight budget week, my phone buzzed with a message. I opened it, assuming it was Juliet, my neighbor who often asked if I needed anything from the supermarket. But it wasn't. It was a screenshot of a Capital One credit card statement showing a balance of $4,632, sent from my mother. No text, no greeting. Just the number glaring at me from the screen, like a stone hurled directly into my face. Before I could react, less than 5 minutes later, another message hit. We need your help paying this by Friday or they'll raise our interest rate to 28%. Your dad and I are under serious stress. I put the phone down, my insides boiling. As I stirred the pot of macaroni, memories rushed back. Last Christmas, they called me in tears, claiming they had no money for Ethan's gift, so I sent them $150. 2 weeks later, I saw their Facebook photos from a ski resort in Vermont. Last summer, they called me at work, claiming their car broke down unexpectedly, and I drained most of my savings to send them another $400. A month later, they proudly showed off their new kitchen sound system to my aunt. I used to think they were just thoughtless, but now I knew. They calculated every penny, and I was their easiest emotional ATM. People respond. Instead, I silenced my phone, had dinner with Ethan, and spent the evening listening to him excitedly talk about his school science project. "Mom, guess what? I got picked to be Saturn because I can make cardboard rings around me." I smiled, nodded, but inside, my heart felt heavy as a rock. The next morning, as I waited for my coffee to brew, I checked my phone to see 5 missed calls from my dad and 1 voicemail. "Call me back immediately, it's serious, the bank is getting involved." I returned his call during lunch break just to end the silent torture. My dad picked up instantly. "Alice, there's a real issue with the house. They're saying they'll foreclose if we don't cover this month's payment. Can you advance us some money, even just a couple thousand? We'll pay you back when we can." I frowned. "You mean, the house is getting foreclosed? Wasn't it fully paid off 5 years ago?" Silence. Then he stammered. "Well, yes, but 3 years ago your mom and I opened a HELOC to renovate the kitchen. Then had some other expenses come up. The bank's getting serious because we've only been paying interest, not the principal. So you're not actually at risk of losing the house. You're just behind on payments. Alice, don't get caught up in semantics, we need help." I sighed. "I can't help you anymore, not this time, not any time. I have Ethan to think about, and after everything that's happened, I no longer trust you'll use the money as intended." I hung up before he could respond. Later that evening, I received an email from someone unexpected. My Aunt Clara, my mother's younger sister, whom I'd only met a handful of times during Thanksgiving. "Alice, your mother is heartbroken. I know you're going through a tough time, but family is supposed to lean on each other. Your mother said you've cut them off completely, even refused to let them stay when they lost their home. Is this true? She also mentioned you've disowned them as family." "Alice, what's going on?" I froze. When had the story twisted so far that I'd become the ungrateful monster? I opened Facebook, just a few swipes, and there it was. A post from my mom with a gloomy photo of their old house in shades of gray. "Help 2 elderly people with nowhere to turn. Abandoned by our own daughter during our darkest hour. We just want to keep our last home." Below was a link to a GoFundMe page titled, "Save Our Only Home, from those who still believe in family." Goal, $85,000. Amount raised, $0. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They weren't just lying to me. They were spinning an entire drama to manipulate friends, family, even strangers for money. Worst of all, they dragged my name into it, as an invisible villain. I didn't comment. Didn't share. Didn't argue. I just took screenshots, saving everything, in case I ever needed legal proof. I never imagined becoming the topic of family dinners, not admired or pitied, but regarded with contempt and disappointed shakes of the head. After my mother posted the GoFundMe plea, I started receiving a flood of calls and messages from people I spoke to less than 3 times a year. My Aunt Ruth was the first. "Alice, have you lost your mind? I heard you refused to let your parents stay when they had nowhere else to go. Do you realize how old they are? 65. How could you be so heartless?" "Aunt Ruth, they're not homeless. They still have their house, car, credit cards. And they're making all of this up." "Making it up? You dare say your mother is lying?" She cried all night on the phone, saying her own daughter refused her, cold as a stranger. I started to respond, to explain, to provide proof, but stopped myself. Explaining to people who don't want to hear only drains me further. That same day, an old classmate I hadn't spoken to in 3 years suddenly texted me a long message. "I don't know what you're going through, but seeing your mom suffering like that really shook me. If there's something between you two, resolve it privately. Don't put them in this position." I didn't reply. I was too exhausted to defend myself in a story I hadn't started, yet was cast as the villain. Just as I was trying to preserve some peace for Ethan and myself, my parents escalated things to a whole new level. Friday night, after bathing Ethan and settling down to read him a bedtime story, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Looking through the peephole, I saw my parents standing at the door, each pulling a suitcase. I opened the door slightly, never taking my eyes off Ethan in the living room. "What are you doing here?" My mother stared at me, her eyes tense and pleading. "The power's been cut off. We have nowhere else to go. You can't let us sleep in our car, right?" I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you call first? Why not go to Aunt Clara's? She has a spare room." My father interrupted, his voice low and strained. "You live alone with Ethan, surely there's space. We'll just stay a few days. Don't be so heartless." I stepped fully into the hallway, shutting the door behind me. "No. I've made myself clear before. This space belongs to me and Ethan. You can't just show up uninvited and pressure me like this." My mother's eyes started to fill with tears. "You'd let your own parents wander the streets? How can you sleep at night, knowing we have to sit in a cold car?" I clenched my fists. "You have money, you have options. This isn't wandering the streets, this is poor planning, and now avoiding responsibility." I took out my phone, opening my contacts. "If you don't leave within 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. And this time, I won't back down." They stared at me, stunned. My mother broke down crying even louder. My father mumbled something under his breath, turned around and pulled their suitcases away. I went back inside, locked all 3 locks, and sank down onto the floor. Ethan looked up and asked, "Who was it, Mom?" I took a deep breath. "Someone delivered pizza to the wrong address, honey." The very next day, I did something I should have done long ago. I contacted an old acquaintance, a lawyer, and explained everything. He advised me to issue a legal cease and desist letter, requiring my parents not to approach my apartment or attempt contact with Ethan without prior written permission. On Monday, I went straight to Ethan's school to meet the principal and head of security. I explained the situation clearly and provided them with a copy of the letter. They immediately updated their system. Only Juliet, my trusted neighbor, and I were permitted to pick Ethan up. Anyone else would be stopped and verified. I left the school feeling both relieved and bitter. Never had I imagined a day would come when I'd have to protect my son from his own grandparents. That evening, while hanging laundry, my phone buzzed again with a text. "Do you have no heart, Alice? We raised you, cared for you, sacrificed so much, and now you threaten to call the police on your own parents? Someday you'll regret this, when we're no longer around." I blocked both numbers. Ultimately, silence was also a form of resistance. And I needed silence just to breathe. 3 weeks after the night my parents stood at my door with suitcases and accusatory eyes, I received a call that changed everything. "Hello, this is Douglas Keller from Sterling Logistics. We reviewed your resume and were impressed by your office management experience. Are you available for an interview this Wednesday?" I could hardly believe my ears. During the family crisis, I'd quietly submitted applications everywhere. Not expecting much, just trying to preserve a shred of hope for myself. And now, here was a real invitation. I agreed, my heart pounding like I'd just run 3 miles. The interview took place in a bright office in downtown Greensburg, about a 25-minute drive from my apartment. Douglas, my direct supervisor, was a man in his 40s, calm, sincere, and without pretension or pressure. "I know being a single mother isn't easy, Alice. We have flexible work policies, especially for employees with young children. If your son gets sick, you can work from home, just let us know." I was almost speechless. I wasn't used to receiving compassion from strangers. In that moment, I nearly broke down. Not from sadness, but from the feeling of finally being seen. 2 days later, I received an official job offer. The salary was $8,000 higher than my previous position, with better benefits and, most importantly, the flexible hours I needed to care for Ethan, especially during his asthma flare-ups. I resigned from my old office that same week. No one tried to keep me. I left the place that had suffocated me for 4 years, feeling as though a chain had been lifted from my neck. A few weeks later, I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in suburban Jeanette, located in a good school district, quiet and safe. Ethan would finally have his own room. When I took him to see it, he jumped with excitement. "Mom, this room has a window facing a big tree. I can put my telescope here." I nodded, smiling. Inside, I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. We moved in on a drizzly day in early June. Juliet, my kind neighbor, helped me pack and watched Ethan for a few hours while I signed the lease. The new apartment was slightly older, with a few chipped paint spots, but for me it represented a fresh start. No painful memories, no calls begging for money, no knocking at 10 p.m. Ethan chose bed sheets decorated with planets, carefully arranged his toys on the shelves, and named his study corner the Space Command Station. With a serious voice, he declared, "Here, I'll study harder to become an astronaut one day. Don't worry, Mom." I nodded, tears welling up, not from sadness but because, for the first time, the future didn't seem completely out of reach. Once settled, I decided to do something I'd hesitated over for years: begin therapy. My new company offered insurance coverage for mental health counseling, and I found a therapist named Dr. Lynn Carter, a woman in her 50s with a warm, deep voice and eyes that seemed to look right through me. During our first session, I sat on the sofa holding a glass of water, unable to speak for 5 minutes. Then I began to talk. From Ethan's premature birth, to being abandoned by my boyfriend, to my mother's cold comments since childhood, each manipulative phone call, each accusation of selfishness because I tried to make it on my own. Dr. Carter never interrupted. When I stopped, she said, "Alice, you grew up in a system of constant manipulation, where love came with conditions, and submission was disguised as family duty." I fell silent. Her words opened the lid of a jar I'd kept sealed for 3 decades. Every boundary you set was viewed as betrayal. Every no was twisted into ingratitude. That's not a loving family, it's covert control. I met her once a week. With each session, I felt another invisible rope loosening. Ropes I hadn't even realized were binding me. I learned not to feel guilty for saying no. I learned to differentiate real love from manipulative affection. I learned to listen to myself instead of chasing approval from people who'd never truly acknowledged my worth. One evening, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat alone on the balcony, looking out at the quiet courtyard. A cup of herbal tea sat on the table, and I felt an unusual peace. As though I'd just walked through a storm, hair tangled, body drenched, but still intact. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt I was finally moving toward my own life. I was making breakfast for Ethan when my phone rang. Seeing the caller's name, my heart skipped a beat. It was my dad. It had been over 2 months since I'd last heard his voice. The night he stood at my apartment door, suitcase in hand, bargaining with guilt and tears. I hesitated for a second, then answered, holding onto a familiar cold distance. "Hi, Alice." His voice sounded deeper than I remembered, but without the authority it once carried. "Your mother started therapy." I remained silent, my knife still rhythmically slicing bread. He continued. "After everything, after you cut contact, your mom had a spike in blood pressure. The doctor said she had to manage stress and recommended counseling. At first, she resisted, but eventually she agreed." I didn't respond. Sensing my silence, he kept talking. "She sees the therapist once a week, nothing magical, but she's starting to realize things. About the past, about you, about herself." His voice faltered slightly before adding, "Your mom told the therapist. She used to think control was love. Now she's learning to recognize it as fear in disguise." For the first time in months, I felt something stir inside. Not forgiveness, not warmth, just surprise. My mother. The woman who always believed she was right, who'd never once apologized, was now in therapy? You might not believe it, my dad said, and that's perfectly understandable. But your mother is changing. Slowly, maybe awkwardly, but genuinely. I sighed, interrupting him. Did you call today just to tell me that? No, he answered. I wanted to ask if we could start again, slowly, on your terms. I leaned against the counter, still holding the spoon I used to mix pancake batter. I thought about all the sleepless nights, the trembling at every ring of the doorbell, the threatening, tearful, guilt-laden messages. And then I remembered something important. I was no longer the woman who nodded just to avoid disappointing someone. Dad, if you and Mom are truly serious about changing, I'm open to giving this a chance. But only on my terms. No bargaining, no manipulation, no boundary crossing. I heard a relieved breath on the other end of the line. I'm listening. Well, from now on we only communicate by email. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. Everything in writing. 2. Absolutely no requests for financial support. Not indirectly, not implied, not hinted. I am not a bank. 3. No unsupervised contact with Ethan. No picking him up, no outings, no overnight stays. If we do meet, it must be supervised, and only with my explicit consent at least 1 week in advance. And 4. I paused, then slowly added. Any sign of manipulation, victim playing, or blame shifting will immediately end all contact. No warnings. Silence. Then my father softly replied. I understand, and I agree. Thank you for not hanging up. I didn't respond. I ended the call, simply. Send an email if needed. Have a good day. 3 weeks later, I received my first email. No complaints, no drama, just a short note from my dad. Your mother just finished her 4th therapy session. She asked if you'd allow us to send Ethan some old pictures of you from childhood, only with your permission. I didn't reply immediately. But I opened the attachment, looking at my 10-year-old self, smiling brightly in a lavender dress my mom had sewn. For the first time, I didn't choke up when seeing my old memories. Instead, I felt how far I'd come. I continued therapy every week. Dr. Carter helped me see the dark corners I'd long avoided. Guilt, the savior complex, fear of abandonment. Alice, she said one afternoon after I mentioned my parents' call. You don't need forgiveness to find peace. All you need is to uphold your boundaries. Because they are a declaration of self-respect. I nodded, and for the first time, I truly believed it. That evening, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat alone on the balcony of our new apartment. The moon shone bright, softly illuminating my hands. I opened my laptop and wrote a brief email back to my father. Thank you for keeping your word. You can share a few pictures with Ethan, however, my boundaries remain unchanged. Progress depends on both sides respecting this. I hit send. No trembling. No worry. Just a lightness. As if I'd finally released one last chain from around my neck. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. I'm no longer living someone else's life. I'm living mine. My story isn't just about escaping my parents' manipulation, it's about learning how to set boundaries, stand my ground, and heal. I lost opportunities, cried, fell. But I also stood up and rebuilt life on my own terms. Now, I no longer live to please others, I live to protect my son and myself. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for your family is to stop letting them control you, and start living your truth. What do you think of Alice's story? Did she do the right thing by setting clear boundaries with her parents? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life, emotional family stories in upcoming episodes.